The order study session on. What day is it? May 30th.
We're all doing great.
It's. Well, yeah, Fred made the point yesterday that, there's an extra week in May. I mean, the Memorial Day is early and usually it's like the marathon, like a long distance marathon from Memorial Day to the end of school. And it's started earlier this year and it's longer, so. Anyways, first up,
Fantastic, I just went to buy it.
okay. Sorry, I can
Continuing with the
No, you're good. Three big topics today. One is obviously, the main event, which is our budget. And we started a new process last year where rather than waiting until August, our budget and finance team have been on pace to move that process up to June. That allows our team to know the direction that we're headed and spend August really getting ready for the school year, getting budgets into school teams' hands or whatnot, ready to go. But it does create pressure, obviously, while audits are going on and some other pieces. So I want to thank our team for getting us to here. You've seen some of the documents along the way since kind of late February, early March, just so that it's not all one spot, but we'll go over all of them today. I also want to acknowledge that we did some reorganizing last year and our HR team is much more involved in this process than they ever have been before. So I do want to acknowledge Aaron and that HR team for taking on some of it too. So with that, I really do just want to turn it over to our budget and finance team to walk us through the budget. From a timing perspective, this is just a study session, ask all the questions, discuss however we want to go. Then on the 6th, we'll bring any changes that you're looking for, any clarifications for you on June 6th. So you can have a first reading. And then we'll bring it back again on June 20th. And that's when the community has a chance to come in and you actually have a budget hearing. Community members can come up and ask you questions about the budget. And then following that hearing, you have the opportunity to pass the formal resolution, which sets the budget into motion for the 24-25 school year. So with that, I'll turn it over to the team.
Thank you. Superintendent Rundle. Provided to you is the 2024-2025 budget summary. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the two individuals to my right, Director Adams and Assistant Director Garcia Favre, for all of their work behind the scenes. On top of, as Superintendent Rundle mentioned, it is audit season, and we're wrapping up our federal and state audit, which looks clean thus far, which has been great. More to come on that in the coming month. But couple that with budgets going on since roughly January, February, it is a lot of work. So thank you to both of you. We will start turning pages on this document. The first, obviously, cover page. We have a picture of Press Learning Center, the table of contents on pages 1 and 2. We dive into the executive summary, and then the real meat starts on page 5. With goals and themes and budget process and changes. This was presented to you, this chart here, the expenditure comparison for all funds at the May 9th meeting. And that was walked through, as always, whether it be our budget summary or our year-end budget document and presentation in October. When you see one of these tables below will be an analysis or at least some clarification as to why change. And this is a change from 23-24 to 24-25, looking at our 5 major funds, our general, capital, debt service, ASB, and transportation. As we go along here, as Superintendent Rundle mentioned, if there are any questions as I move to a page or you want to stop me, feel free to jump in and ask the questions. This is the opportunity to do so. So as we look at our general capital, debt service, ASB, and transportation, as I said, we have percent change on the far right side. And the reason as to why the increase or decrease moving into the 24-25 school year is presented there.
When would you like to sort of go into the explanation for including expenditures or appropriations in the capital fund for a bond that is in the future?
right now. If you want to do that. So in that, on the capital fund, there's an asterisk there. For 23-24, we have $13.2 million budgeted. In 24-25, we were 23.1. What we looked at in doing that is there is the conversation, potentiality of a bond passage this next year, particularly in April, 120, 130 million. We discussed that as a team. We added an additional $10 million in there in anticipation, just in case said bond passes. No money would be expended unless a bond is passed by our community. At that point, we would need to be ready for potentiality of hiring architects, engineers, even the possibility of some construction or groundbreaking that would be quite quick. But we need to be aware of that and anticipate that possibility. Hence, we allocated $10 million if said bond passes.
So I guess my question is, I've looked at the accounting manual for school districts, in particular chapter 2 that deals with budgeting. And I think it's, at least in my view, and tell me if you have a different opinion, that when it comes onto the revenue recognition side, that we can recognize the revenue, and we don't, in fact, in our budget, recognize the revenue for speculative bond. But then if we're not recognizing the revenue, how can we appropriate or authorize an expenditure given RCW 28A 505-130, which is that each fund has to be balanced because we have an imbalance in terms of revenue into the capital fund, and then appropriations or authorized expenditures which would exceed that. And it seems the, alternative, and, I would like to know if there's any precedent for other districts doing this. It's simply to increase appropriations and authorized expenditures for the Cap Tech Fund when we have the funds, which seems like at earliest would perhaps be June. That's assuming that the board passes a bond. It assumes that voters approve a bond. The bond then has to be, the measure certified in early May, and then it has to be sold on into the open market in June. And I recognize there then might be expenditures that we would want to authorize over the summer, particularly to ramp up on the architectural. But we're going to be doing a lot of paperwork associated with putting forward a bond proposal, selling the bond, so on and so forth. It seems we could just amend our budget to then appropriate or authorize expenditures when we have the funds to do so.
Yeah, great question. There's two standard operating procedures districts typically will use. As you mentioned, the latter is a budget extension. If and when said bond passes, we can say, hey, we don't have the expenditure authority, and we would need to readjust, extend, as they say, our capital budget to expend those funds in June, in July, et cetera. The other side of it is what we did, and it's very standard in almost every district. In fact, we spoke with Paul Stone, who is the auditor and kind of governor of the state accounting manual at OSPI. And in turn, Katie touched base with Justin Lanting, who is the fiscal officer for the Puget Sound Educational Service District. And both of them said, yeah, what we do is very standard in regard to anticipating a bond passage. Hence, we added $10 million in there. So there's kind of two ways to do it. We decided in your case, the former versus the latter, and that's pretty standard.
And we did show an increase in the revenue side too of the possibility of the bond passing. If you look at page 23, you'll see I have revenue at $139 million. That is just in case if the bond passed. So I did show that on the revenue side too. So, we do have the ability to take the money in if it passes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess mine is, sort of how I prefaced it when I look at revenue recognition and for budgeting purposes. Even bands or bonds anticipatory notes, when you're much further down the road, those are usually issued after voters have approved, but before the bond has been sold as a short-term note, aren't recognized as revenue. That's pretty clear in the accounting manual. Therefore, maybe standard practices to deviate what is recommended in OSPI's accounting. But for me, first and foremost, the budget is not for the ESD. It's for our district to have a budget and it's for board to approve it and for, citizens to be on board. And I guess I fundamentally don't understand the logic of recognizing revenue for a bond that's in the future that has not been presented to the board, that hasn't been voted on, that hasn't been approved.
Do you, thinking about the end in mind a little bit, is it that, you fundamentally disagree or are with the practice of it, or are you just fundamentally uncomfortable with that, Director Glowitz, in terms of the process, or, I guess I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, it
Like,
conflicts
I
with
feel
my,
like, we've looked at the legal side of this, we've looked at the ESD, we've talked to OSPI, and there's nothing that is putting us into legal jeopardy or anything like that, and so, at least from my perspective. So if that is a constant, then maybe the conversation is more of a philosophical about what it says to community or concerns about other things, and
Well,
maybe.
yeah, I mean, it's a couple. I mean, I think one, it looks like it's, front running the determination on the bond. I think two, it's just generally, maybe other districts do it. I think a lot of public accounting is pretty crappy. Like, you don't recognize revenue until it's been realized. And something like this that is, I think, subject to enough, potentialities, you particularly don't recognize when it's material. Appropriations is authorization. So no, I just fundamentally am uncomfortable authorizing money to be spent that we don't currently have.
Got it, and then I'm gonna step out of the conversation, because I think you as a board have to have this. What I had heard in previous meetings and your email questions, which I very much appreciate ahead so we could prepare, is you wanted to know, do other districts do this? And if so, okay, and so what I'm not hearing then is you're not questioning our team or what we're doing in terms of, hey, this is something that can happen or whatnot. You're not questioning like the ability of all of us to do our jobs. You're questioning at a higher level, is this the right thing to do given how the community might do? So it's not about our or how we're doing our jobs. It's really that.
Yeah, I mean, like the initial question that I want to answer, and you've answered, so thank you, is just, do other districts do this sort of accounting? It's just sort of like my initial, question, and if not, like, that's sort of a
I
separate.
think.
And now that I
I
understand that,
think
like,
that's
that
been, I
is,
think it's been answered.
okay, and that is,
So
and then,
we're gonna
and then
move forward.
it's not questioning that, it's just saying, I still, for the aforementioned reasons, have an issue with designing a budget.
Okay, we're gonna.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just, before we move on, I just wanted to chime in to say, like, I am not, and we'll probably have further discussion about this later, but like, I'm not uncomfortable with it, because to me, it's like saying, if, in a house, on a household level, like, if I get the bonus that I'm expecting, at the end of the year, let's remodel the bathroom, like, and then doing some planning ahead of time for like, if that money comes in, we'll hire the architect on this date and we'll get rolling, and then maybe we can do the bathroom over the summer. Like, I don't see the difference there. Like, we're not spending money that we don't have yet. It's just about planning, and it very clearly says, if there is no bond, like, this budget estimate will be reduced by $10 million. Like, that covers that, in my opinion. So that's just my.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Exactly right. Like, that's exactly what I was waiting to say, but, and also, I would love to take this time that we have our budget experts with us to really sort of walk through this document, because, as we know, I have my handicaps with, math. And, I would really love to hear from you guys and help me walk through this, and then we can save discussion for after if we have time, because I'm worried that your allotment of time is gonna get cut up, and then I'll have to go through it on my own, and that will be exactly.
And I also already have a different question about this page. Okay, this is what I had to ask.
Yeah.
Just, can you explain it both to me and kind of to the public who might be watching this later, probably not live? Like, why the debt service number is up so much, given that we heard earlier this year about how we were doing some refinancing and that it was gonna save, the voters of Mercer Island, or whatever, the residents of Mercer Island, all this money. And like, I understand that some of this is about bond expenditures, potentially. There's a bond, that there was how much of that is bond expenditures? Is it like half, like ballpark?
It's about 2 million.
Okay,
Just to be, just so that, because when you pass a bond, there's a lot of fees that come with it with the selling. And we wanted to have capacity in there to be able to pay the fees.
So that's in the debt service number.
Too, yeah, the fees are coming out of the debt service fund when you pass a bond.
Can you make a note,
Yes.
if the board agrees, make a note so that we see basically all the places where the potential bond is impacting numbers?
Would you like to have how much is actually for the debt service
Yeah.
payments listed out?
Yeah.
Oh, is that, did you include that in?
That's in the total expenditures under the debt service. We can put an asterisk and say how much is actually committed for these.
Yeah.
If-
Yeah.
Would that
Okay,
be
it
helpful?
seems
Okay,
like
that's
that would
not,
be
that's not.
Yeah,
hard at
that'd
all.
be great.
Okay,
Just so we're very clear on where those numbers are
Yeah.
coming from and, yeah, and just to add, my understanding of doing it this way, and I agree, I mean, any budget is forecasting. I mean, but until you close the book, closing the books is fact, budget is forecasting. So I don't have any issue with that. I think the transparency is tremendously
Okay.
important and thank you for that. And,
And there is, anyone can look.
I'm
at
still
it
talking.
for how
yeah,
forecast.
you've got a lot of time,
Okay.
so, I'm gonna need a minute. Be back. It's so rude, damn. Budget is forecasting. My understanding also is the staff time it's gonna take and board time to come in and do a revised budget. So I don't have any interest in adding work. And if the experts in accounting who actually do it for a living and successfully are telling us that this is the best way to do it and the most streamlined for them, I don't question that for a second. I appreciate you checking with the other experts in the area. I know you guys have both worked for many other districts, and I assume that this is how you've done it as well. So that's my opinion on that as well. Christina, did you want to say anything quickly on that? I saw you nodding, but.
Yes, I do would like clarification on those numbers.
Okay.
May not. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
and we'll add notes.
Any other questions on this page? Are you guys done with this?
Yes. Moving to page 6, we have analysis of proposed general fund budget expenditures. This is a lot of verbiage at the top part of the page, but it does walk through several years of personnel expenses versus MSOC. At the bottom of the page is what we're required via RCW 28A 505060 is to present to you for your budget plan summary with estimated ending fund balance. The fund balance is not required by state law, but the four-year budget plan summary is, and we present that to you, as I mentioned, and submit that to the state also. You can take a quick glance at like 26, 27 and 27, 28. But we all know that as the new biennium is going to come up at the state, when you start moving from a year to a year, it really becomes apples to oranges. So we're estimating as best we can, but I wouldn't take too much stock in those numbers as we move forward. I did add in regard to the estimated ending fund balance, which I believe Director Souza asked for about a year or so ago. In 27, 28, we had a TBD there. Now it's 9%, 10% is what we estimate we should be able to hit at that point in our current target. On page 7, general fund expenditure comparison by object. This, of course, was presented also on May 9th to you all. It's just another way in regard to our accounting code to look at our expenditures. Typically, we look at them by program. This is by object code, in particular, salaries certified, salaries classified, and benefits, or we know as salaries and benefits or personnel costs. And then MSOC for material supplies and operating costs, which deals with our supply of materials, obviously, purchase services, travel, and then capital purchases. And he probably already clarified that on May 9th, but capital via the accounting code is any purchase over $5,000 have to be categorized into that in the 9,000 series. Don't ask me why, that is just the way it is. So
What, sorry, can I ask, why is it lower? Like sorry, that was not a
We're
good
not
question.
planning on making any large capital purchases of items over 5,000.
Okay,
So we kind of, when we go out to budget with the buildings and the departments, they
Right.
tell us what they're planning to do.
It would be like, we want to buy new wrestling mats.
right,
And that would be over $5,000 purchase. If there isn't anything, or refurbishment of football helmets, things like that, we meet with the buildings. If we know what those are, obviously they will fall into that category.
okay,
And just remembering that, you know, being under MSOC, that's why, I mean, someone may at home say, I thought we're doing carpets and all of that. That's because that's all in the capital, remembering that this is material supplies and operating costs.
Stuff.
You don't tend to purchase huge things with MSOC dollars.
Pens, paper, things like that. And page 8 was the explanation. I'm sure you went through on page 9, but Herbert the snail is at the bottom. On to page 9, something you have not seen yet, but it's another way of looking at the division of our personnel versus MSOC. This is year over year, 23-24 to 24-25. And in the middle is a little more detailed explanation of what is MSOC and then what do our personnel expenses include. So as anyone were to pick up this document, the layperson would say, how does a school district function, et cetera? What does MSOC mean? What do the personnel expenses include? They can look at that and hopefully better understand exactly where our money goes to, our expenses go to. And then looking at 23-24, about 16% went to MSOC, about 83.6 went to personnel. And then in 24-25, we saw about 82.9 and then 17% to MSOC. Once again, just another way to look at this visually.
Since we are gonna be later talking on MSOC, ledge priorities, I know there was an increase with MSOC this year by the legislature. Do you have a recommended number and explanation of what we might be wanting to advocate for? Or, I mean,
I would just like to see that the utilities and the insurance actually gets covered by the state. That's one line item that they really have not adjusted to keep up with inflation. Our risk pool has gone up 150%, including the next year's, and we've only received 2% more funding on that. And we're paying over $1 million in insurance right now.
150% since, is it?
Since 6 years, yes, 6
and you're
years.
talking in turn, not like employees and.
No, this is
district
our
insurance.
district
Okay.
risk pool. We have to have, you can't operate it.
I just wanna make sure.
And our utilities have gone up about almost 6%, and that's the other line that got two, it's all in the same line, 2.2 additional funding. And that is causing a
We
very
got
hard
2.2%.
in the last 6 years
Okay,
on the MSOC side in that one line, utilities and insurance.
and, okay,
And I think that's an area all districts are running into with an increasing cost that is not being covered by the state.
okay, because we just know, as we talked about, I don't get too into it, but it's the story.
Yeah.
It's the numbers and it's the examples that make a difference.
Yeah,
If the state were to cover insurance alone, that would be $1 million for us. And it just seems reasonable and logical that they should or could do that.
Since it's required by law.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
and we're paying another state agency.
right.
And something we can do, if that becomes one of your ledge priorities, then once we close the books out in the fall, then we can bring you hard numbers. So when you're talking to the representatives and others, you'll have hard numbers that we can put together, one pagers for you on all of that.
Usually the second meeting in October, we provide the F-196 of the year-end report.
Okay. Any other questions on this?
On to page 10, this also was presented at the May 9th meeting. Looking at our budgeted sources of revenue, generally speaking, our kind of our 3 pots of money. That's local, if you will, state, and then federal, obviously year over year, 23-24 to 24-25. And then as we move on to district information, this truly is for, like I mentioned, the layperson earlier. If they don't know how a school district functions, who our leadership is, our board of directors, you all, position, term, roles, they can easily take a look at that on page 12. And then kind of a deeper dive into district administration onto page 13. Who is our superintendent, who is our director of learning services, curriculum instruction and assessment, with also phone numbers they can contact these individuals. So it makes it even more transparent, more accessible to the members of our community. On to page 14, even a little more granular, district administration, schools and principals. Obviously, our 6 schools and the leadership in each of those buildings. And their mascots. And then on to page 15, the district org chart, another way of looking at this, was presented to you all on April 18th. There has been a couple of changes to this I do want to point out. One in particular, the associate principal position is vacant. They're being interviewed for hiring to that currently at Islander Middle School. And then also, sadly, our principal, John Wilmoth, is leaving us, and that position is currently being hired for but a loss. Those are the changes. On to page 16, we have our student fee schedule, which we walked through and discussed at the April 18th meeting. But here it is, a 3-year overview. Just a side note, what I will hope to have is as we move forward is a 5-year look as we year to year. So we'll have 25, 26, ultimately in 26, 27, always have a 5-year glance back at those fees, additions and changes. On to page 17, student calendar for 24, 25. And Superintendent Runde told me this, we presented this the summer of 21 or 22.
Let's see, that was the 22, so it was the spring of 22 when we agreed on this calendar.
So before Matt.
Yes, the BM.
So we'll strike that from the record. Yeah.
7 years, sorry.
On to page 18, this was presented on March 28th. I've always enjoyed this page in particular. It's a Mercer Island property tax rates for 2024. Those usually come out, or at least via King County, and are known in February and then presented, walked through, discussed in March. And then I also, I don't know if I have it or not, but we have the historical and current levy rates from 2015 through 2024. It's a nice little tool to have. And on page 19, we start the budget development process. Once again, the layperson, they don't know what a budget is to a school district, if they don't know kind of the generalities of our accounting system.
I'm so sorry, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
Can we just back up to the bottom of page 18?
Yes,
So the 2017, the little slice of yellow on top, the 0.06.
yes,
That's just there, that's there only because we haven't run a transportation levy since then.
correct. Transportation levies operate like bonds where it's a one-time shot, you have your dollar figure out there. I think it was 700,000 was that transportation levy, if I'm correct off the top of my head. And that's the only reason it was there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, I'm sorry, since we went back to this page. Can you remind me why the rates have dropped? No. Like why, like the 24, it's those
Our assessed valuation went up.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
when the assessed valuation goes up, rates go down and vice versa, roughly speaking.
And just on the transportation, one more, just to add on to what Director Sullivan said. Unlike the Cap Tech and the EP&O, where it's passed and then it's collected over a period of time, by state law, you can only collect that in one chunk. So transportations, and then you can only do it once every 4 years or 6 years. Six-
Yeah.
Something like that, but so
We decided not to do it.
we have not.
Yeah, if for the average reader, it might be useful to show average assessed valuation or whatever of homes like underneath that kind of, so that, because otherwise you glance at this and it looks like, oh, like people are supporting the schools less and less, or people are less willing, you know what I mean? Like it
Oh, okay.
looks,
Sure.
that's what it looks like.
Oh,
Yeah,
I know this is local, but when one's looking at education, McCleary Part 1 gives a very distorted
Correct.
sense of what that is for those who are not aware. And for those who are aware, presenting in this way doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah. Fair enough.
In other words,
The levy cap is in there
Yeah.
also, yeah.
so when the EP&O got capped at a lower rate because the state was theoretically paying for more, your tax bill on that previous one you didn't see any great reduction in your tax bill because your state taxes for education went up, but your local taxes went down.
It was, yeah, it was more, for Mercer Island, it was more than offsetting. The reduction
Mhm.
was outweighed by, I think, the increase.
You have a lot of footnotes.
Yeah, 18B.
I mean, this over the last decade with the VBAS now, currently here, this is how this document gets developed. That's how the dashboard gets developed. I want to see last year's, 23, 24 information overlaid on the 24, 25. If it helps you all, it helps us all. So I appreciate the input. On 19 budget development process.
And to me, there's two ways. I mean, one, it could just put in. I mean, either like a filler for what McCleary, if you were to add McCleary, what it'd be, or just
Yeah.
to give like a before and after and say why. Because otherwise it gives, I think, an inaccurate view that the average islander is paying a lot less for schools.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because the way in which it's being collected, more is being collected from the state, less from the city.
I appreciate that, Aaron.
Yeah.
20 is what is a budget, and then below is the accounting system, obviously a very 35,000 foot perspective. And then on to page 21, budget assumptions and priorities. We walked through this, I think, last year for this year's budget. But these are tied to our OEs, whether that be OE7, OE6, OE9, or OE8. And what our assumptions as we build our budget each year. In particular, I have a note at the bottom, and I think this was Director D'Souza's request also. I kept this in here with added language, the last half of the paragraph regarding our our credit rating via Moody's that was downgraded. I think that's important to keep there. I added at the bottom in council with Superintendent Rundle. Moody's has stated in their March 2024 credit opinion that in order for our district and districts in the region to obtain a AAA rating, they would need at least 25% fund balance. I think that's important to cite. I don't see us ever getting to 25%. I don't.
We wouldn't want to, right?
No.
No, it would be extraordinarily irresponsible. We wouldn't have any staff. I think this is a great way, like the note, in terms of adding to 18 to explain that chart, like the points, the bullet points, it just makes it very simple than a full written paragraph.
And then on page 22 is budget summary and resolution. 23 was presented March 28th meeting. There's a little more information in here now since budget has been developed, the F205, et cetera. We had 23, 24 for sure on there at the March 28th meeting, but now Director Adams and Assistant Director Garcia Fowler have added a little more information for 24, 25. I'm gonna walk through that.
Oh, sure. If you look at it, the numbers in bold are actuals. The others are all projected. Okay, so I went back and I put in our actual beginning fund balances on each fund. And then we were looking at each budget. We have completed our budget process. Still doing some work on it, but this is our estimated budget right now for general is $77,649,260. And then if you go on down, you'll see in the capital, we have added 139 million to just for that bond passes, that the revenue is being reflected there. And also the increase of 10 million in the expenditures in capital if that bond passes. We did reduce the transfer by 250,000 from capital to general. As I said, each year we're going to lower that, or we'll see what we can do. We do have technology staff that is being paid fully out of CapTech, and it's going to stay that way.
Do we know how we compare to other districts when we look at transfer in and transfer out? And from my senses, Bellevue may be similar, but other districts such as Issaquah may be very little to non-existent.
I contacted some districts. I think it was it Bellevue or Issaquah that said 50% of their CapTech goes to salaries. And then another district was 15, another one was like 28. It fluctuates in between districts on the projects they have and how much they went out for. But I was surprised when Issaquah was at 50%.
But you said, but there's a significant range.
Yes, it ranges on the need and what you need in technology and what that levy and the limit on your levy. And how big it is.
So if they're working on some big changeover.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and some people have used a lot of it for staffing just to be able to keep your technologies full, because the state truly doesn't fund technology.
For committed. Putting aside whether or not we put in revenue from a potential bond,
Mhm.
if we do, shouldn't those funds that would then be expended for capital projects within. The capital fund be committed for those bond projects?
But when the bond passes and how the treasury lays out the fees, they tell you where to charge the fees. We don't have a choice. So when you do a bond, like we just did the refinancing, I had fees I had to show in the debt service because it was debt service.
My point is of the. In the capital
Mhm.
fund, we're gonna show expenditures of 20 million.
Mhm.
Although I thought it was 23 on an earlier page. Is that an inconsistency, whatever it is, whether it's
Oh,
20 or.
you have to add the transfer in. I didn't add the transfer in on this. I'll correct that. I gotta add the transfer in for total expenditures.
Got it, that. I mean, we're not segregating then, or are we, for funds that we receive from a potential bond? Like, do they just all go into cap tech, or do some districts have a means of segregating? I know for adjacent district, I mean, Issaquah, for instance, has run into issues where it paid for projects outside the scope of the bonds. And it seems to me that having sort of clear, separate and segregated accounts.
It
would be the
will,
way to
there
go.
is.
We do internally.
We do internally. There's a
Yeah.
special source code that you have to use in the accounting, when you're accounting for expenditures for bonds versus capital levy money. It's a different source code in the account code. And we also have a separate general ledger, a GL line that will hold that money away from the cap tech money. One's 861, the other's 862. They're separated in our budget status report and they'll stay separated in our accounting.
Anything in this grid that would be potentially impacted by a bond passing, I think should also have like the same little asterisk.
Okay,
As what
okay.
we had on that first page.
We could even,
Make it super clear.
all right.
They could just use the same disclaimer again.
Mhm.
And then a quick follow-up, I have, there's Lake Washington, contacted them, they have a $43 million cap tech, 17% goes in as personnel and benefits. Issaquah was 50% of the $35 million cap tech.
Well, that's
But it's a significant, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it depends on the district. It truly does, and the need in that district.
And I guess what the board approves.
Yeah. That's it too.
On to page 24 is the official document. You'll see the resolution 730, you'll see the June 6th meeting for first reading. And obviously it's the whereas and therefores we all enjoy on page 24 and 25. But the key is the appropriation level. This is the document that others look for. What have you all as a board approved for expenditures? And obviously, if we exceed those or come close to that, then the budget extension gets kicked in because we need to explain to the world why we're spending more than you allocated, allowed us to spend. Starting on page 26 is general fund budget summary. In particular, on page 27 and 28, that was presented at the May 9th meeting by Executive Director Battersby. It was classified FTE by activity.
Real quickly, going back to appropriations, I mean, so the authority that we're giving, I mean, just formally. Like if the administration spends $20 million in cap tech, right, that's under the appropriation level. And the bond doesn't pass, like, I mean.
Isn't that
Like, that's what we've authorized as a board.
correct? But you also have within your OEs parameters that you have set for me. So yes, theoretically, that could happen. I think fundamentally, then you have to either A, trust that we have the best interest of the school district in mind, or B, think that your actions are gonna somehow jeopardize the district. I feel very comfortable with what we're presenting because, I want to uphold all of the OEs and I want to be the best representative of our school district. But
we are authorizing more money than we have.
you're authorizing, but you're authorizing perhaps. So if you trust us that we're gonna do the very best, this is something, we feel like this would be the best. If that's a concern, or you think the voters who put you in will have concerns about that, that's a different conversation.
And I just wanna like, I mean, like, just thinking about Maggie Ty's bathroom renovation analogy. Like, I don't think this is a shared concern of the board. I mean, I take Director Glowitz's concern seriously, and I've heard it pretty thoroughly a couple of times, and I understand and appreciate where you're coming from to sort of give best practices or most clarity or whatever. But I think it's important to think, is this a shared board concern of something that we need to focus on further? Or that we really need to like readjust our budget document about, or is this something that, or do we have a shared understanding that this is sort of future casting what a past bond would look like? And obviously, we're not gonna, renovate our bathrooms like we got a bonus if we didn't.
And I also think that it's part of our fiscal responsibility as a board to plan for the money that we expect might be coming.
Mhm.
Like, we should have a plan that goes both ways. Like, we should obviously have a plan for if it's not
Mhm.
coming, and we should have a plan for if it is coming. But it would be really irresponsible to be like, until the money hits our bank account, we can't even think about this. We can't budget for it. We can't plan how we would use the money. We can't plan how this would impact our other accounts. Like, that's irresponsible. Like, that's like irresponsible no matter what. Like, even if we were able to, even if we did decide to run a bond and we passed it, it would be irresponsible to not be planning ahead. Like, that's why we have that.
Yeah, I think your responsibility is a strong word. I didn't use it in terms of saying.
No, those
how
are
we
my
should-
words.
You know,
I'm holding
how we
those.
should account or not. I mean, I do think the principles of accounting, even if public entities don't always follow it, I think best practices are relatively clear.
Are you suggesting
I'm
that
not-
they're not following them? Because.
No, I think we are, and I think, but I don't think the public entities always, I mean,
But we're
Yeah.
not talking about other public entities. We're only talking. about-
I don't see
I don't.
why it's difficult to
We're
make.
hearing that there's multiple ways of doing things,
That's
and this is
what I've
what
heard.
our
Well,
experts
and then
are
that'd be
telling us is the
irresponsible.
best way to do it. And so, if you're suggesting that they're doing something illegal or unethical, then let's have a discussion.
I
If
think-
not, it's your general opinion, and I think we
Okay,
all
okay.
understand. So let's.
I think there's a lot of board
we need to
oversight
stop
besides the
bringing this
legal
up, Because
and.
it's actually a violation of board policy to continue to bring the same issue up.
Did
over and over
we
again.
do this in 2012? Last question.
I wasn't here.
Okay, we don't know. In terms of the accounting, I don't.
We can probably go back.
The last
I
time we
can
passed the
go
bond.
back and see.
Only if there's board consensus to direct.
Okay,
No,
we don't know.
Time to do that.
Dan can look right now on.
Okay, I mean, no, like, I'm not the
And go
expert.
back and find it. It doesn't.
I also, just one other thing, around bumpers that you put into play, whoever your superintendent is and for future boards. Let's say we get to the 5% this year for fund balance. You put in a bumper that says anytime that the superintendent wants to take fund balance below 5%. Has to be, the board authorization has to be there.
And.
If we were to expend that without the bond money, we would be taking us way below the 5%, and so you'd have to approve that anyway. So you do have a built-in mechanism in your OE based on the parameters you put into place recently.
On page 27 and 28, as I mentioned, Executive Director Battersby presented this classified FTE by activity and certified FTE by activity code. Yet another accounting way to look at this, whether it be program, whether it be object, you can also look at activity, even location. But activity in this case seemed to be the best way to flesh out where our FTE are. And we've added, as we continue to move forward year over year, we have a 5-year look back at how our FTE has increased or decreased, depending on positions.
Is health, that's just nurses office.
I'm sorry, Cindy.
Sorry, the category of health under other support, is that just like nurses, basically, nurse
Correct.
line?
Nurse, psych, things
I
like
think that helps as well.
OT, PT, yeah,
So,
Ah, okay.
yeah.
all right.
Are the therapists, counselors, sorry, I was like, therapists, are the counselors under health or is that separate?
It's 24,
Okay, sorry.
activity 24.
Did anything, and sorry, this may not be the right forum for asking this question, did anything ever come of, I remember Deborah, when you went to the, that thing in Washington DC, there were people talking about how in other states, school districts have been able to get insurance reimbursement or like Medicaid reimbursement for OT and PT services, speech, right? Is
Yeah,
that-
we ask families as part of our IEP process,
Yeah,
if they consent to us looking into that, because the parent does have to give consent.
I see.
And then we look into it off of that. We tend not to, have a lot of students who qualify, but the ones who do, there is some reimbursement there.
And then there's also the issue with mental health, and that's the city, because
Yeah.
it's DC, MIYFS.
Yeah,
And they have looked into it, and I think continue to, but the reimbursement rate versus the overhead of trying to get it, I think that's the main reason.
Yeah.
It's also, an issue of privacy. So if the school is involved in billing, then students lose that confidentiality. Or at least some confidentiality. And so, it's always something we can ask about again,
Yeah,
but it has been looked into and fairly recently.
okay, thank you.
On page 29, revenues to support operations. That original page, this isn't a comparison to, which may have, I don't know, the way it's shown. If you look at page 10 as an example, this is a little deeper dive into regard to our revenue sources, local, state, and federal. One thing we do want to point out is the oddities of the state accounting manual. In regard to our federal special purpose, we have grants mainly there, but you see an increase from 23-24 to 24-25 of 20%. For some unknown reason, we're required by the state to put this is where our capacity lives. And we had 1.5 million in capacity of 24 current year, and we added 500,000 additional 24-25. And mainly because we were, I guess, hit, might be the best term, with a significant out-of-state placements in special education. And so we need to fund that. Capacity provides the ability to be a little bit flexible in expenditures up to 1.5 million in situations such as that. And we see that we need to have a little bit more, 500,000 more, hence the increase in that line. Why it lives in federal special purpose, I don't have an answer for that. That is the accounting manual in the states and the auditors look at.
Can you explain what you mean by capacity?
Capacity gives you the ability to accept money that you might have not known was coming your way. Let's say we got a grant for 150,000. If I didn't have capacity built on both sides of the budget, we would not be able to spend that grant and go forward without a budget revision and anything else like that. So it also helps us if we have additional special ed spending like we did this year. Yes, we're going to get revenue in to help us with that, but I had to have capacity on the expenditure side so we could pay the bills.
It's like some built-in kind of flexibility.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
safety net is something that helps to kind of, I guess you're in the rears fund special education. It does not show up until
August.
Right.
We'll be receiving a little over 2 million this year, but we've already expended that, hence capacity gives us the ability when we have a student that shows up on our doorstep end of August,
Yeah.
September, that says, we need these services.
Yeah.
Capacity gives us flexibility, okay, then we can attack that, we can deal with that, but we know the money will be coming from the state in some form in August, but that's a year away.
Is,
Yeah.
is that where for whatever reason, and a variety of them, the miss was in terms of our EPNO levy and not building enough capacity?
Oh, I think they.
It's a similar concept, but on a different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is.
But similar concept.
It
right?
is, we should have gone to the max amount in our levy instead of just leveling it at 12 million. Now, because it left money on the table, you want to do the highest you possibly think you might be able to get. And what we're doing is trying to make sure we have enough revenue, enough expenditure room, flexibility that if we do get additional money coming in to pay for very expensive things, that we'll be able to do it.
That like the state changes the rate.
Oh, yeah.
And
And
that,
that falls into
might be,
into
right,
the
yeah.
EPO conversation,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you look at the next levy, we don't know what the state, any biennium, any legislative
Yeah.
session will be able to do. Will it be an either or instead of a lesser than? We kind of need that flexibility that didn't take place in the original EPN levy.
Do you guys, are you following this? Okay, just because you weren't part of that.
It's basically like, it was, in my head, I think of this budget as being like a very like complicated machine with a lot of like moving parts to it, but so it's like these parts have a little bit of flex in
Yeah.
them instead of all being like completely rigid and like, I can't. That's very helpful, thank you.
Then on to page 31, way back in February 8th, at least the top part of the page, presented to you our 24-25 after many meetings with our schools and the leadership there, projected enrollment FTE, which is right on track as far as I know. Superintendent Rundle, I don't know if you jumped in there as you've been tracking it quite close.
Yeah, I mean, we are, we're tracking kindergarten daily, we're tracking, elementary weekly and, middle school, they're right where they need to be. High school's above right now. But we've also done some projections around what happens between May, and September and then October. And while they're above, we project that there will be maybe slightly above, they'll be right in there. I think middle school is gonna be more, and I think elementary is gonna come in higher, slightly as well. So I think we've built in the right buffer. It's not gonna be extraordinary, it's not gonna be a wave of revenue, but I'm feeling really positive with the projections they set out.
Do we know, and it might be too early, like which of the models we're tracking mostly? I mean, we have the two models and we've been relying on the Davis two, but is that still the most accurate? And I guess it'll be something perhaps to reassess next year. Is like just which of the models are we tracking most closely to? And then,
Wait, models of what?
Democrat, the Democrat.
EDS and Davis.
Yeah, and then when, I think when we did it a year ago, the thought was maybe 3 years. But anyways, to give it thought of,
Yes.
if we're still tracking for that, if we want a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but sort of the demographic.
Yeah, I think October, once we get to the October count, that'll be a great point to kind of put a benchmark down and say, where does that fall on the lines and where is that? And we can do last year's, this year's and kind of see. That's my thinking, but your world.
Yeah.
That works for me.
Is it too soon to say how many kids we've gotten through open enrollment at high school or in whether any have come through middle school?
Sorry, I'm dealing with a quick issue here. I'm trying to stave off something down at one of the schools. Go ahead again.
I was just saying, is it too soon to say how many kids we've maybe gotten through open enrollment at the high school and or eighth grade?
It's not too early to tell. I can look that up while we continue here, because we have a live spreadsheet now.
And then at the bottom, let's just look at that. At the bottom of the page is ongoing since 2012, 2013, historical and projected student enrollment. Once again, I'm required by state law to let you know, this is required under 28A 50506. So we project about 4 years out. You take a quick glance.
Is
at
that the Davis two that we're using?
That's where, we're kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Look at that. And once again, I agree with you, Director Glowitz, we should do a reassessment by like October, November. Take a look at that. And once again, there's apples to oranges, but it's there.
All right, I've got it.
Got it.
We're right at 20 students. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ninth graders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 eighth graders, 2 11th graders, and then that leaves 5 10th graders so far. And then we have a few students who are on hold or pending or in review, depending on where they are in the process. So we still have some more coming along.
Great. Do we feel like there's gonna be, I'm sorry to get us off topic. Do we feel like there's gonna be movement on that over the summer historically or?
There'll be some, absolutely. There'll also be movement on the staff side. And I am anticipating the city side as well. We're up to 4 students from the city, and I think that's gonna go up as well.
Great.
So we have 63 staff members right now. That will shift depending on people who might leave unexpectedly and then new hires or whatnot, so. somewhere.
We make that a consideration if we're hiring, if you've got 3 or more kids, you're.
It's like points, yeah.
At least that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Aaron's not amused.
Just kidding. I know the implant I'm on. I wouldn't do it anyway. All right, any final questions? As always, I know our staff through our superintendent is available for questions and thank you for, I think this new timeline is excellent, like just gets us all on the same page as questions come up. It just gives us longer to digest and, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to take a quick break.
Yeah, it's 8:59. Let's take, 3 to 5, whatever one needs to do. And then we'll start.
I wish it was 8:59.
9:59. My computer says 8:59. I don't know why it keeps
You're
trying
on
to.
the block.
You're in mountain zone.
It's trying to change the timeline. I'm like, I don't.
It's just the last hour was just a dream.
It was a dream. It was a dream. I don't know why. Okay, thank you all. And yeah.
Yep.
We're in the club.
Yeah.
You can have, but thank you.
Session, moving on to our next agenda item, which is this long-range facility plan monitoring. And a report on our status, right?
And so there are, a few different components here. I'm gonna take you to June, not to January, to June 20th first. That study session is when the two architect firms will come and they'll each present for about an hour. Their presentation is really gonna be designed along with our team to give you an update of where they're leaving off for the summer when they go off now to start their work based on all of the engagement sessions and all of their thinking. So that's gonna come there. Today, we're really here to focus in on and bring back to you, yes, somewhat of kind of where we are, but really in context of other questions that have been asked or have been posed relative to what if? If we do this, how will that impact a potential bond decision in the fall? If we do this, how might that impact so that you are thinking not just about what's coming on June 20th, but also the larger context as we head into the fall and start contemplating putting a bond on the ballot next spring. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy to kickstart. You have in front of you this document here. This is just a note-taking document, if you would like it, because they're going to be talking about a lot of different scenarios. And so we thought, if you're following along, this might help you track to take notes or whatnot to ask questions along the way. And then at the end, we'll give you all the information that you're going to see today. Great.
Great. Nice to see you. Thanks for having us. Okay, so the topics we want to cover today, there's been a request to review Puget Sound area elementary school square foot cost and data, similar to what we looked at for Islander Middle School. So Ed's going to be here to share some information about that. We also want to look at what a 450 or 600 student elementary cost might be on Mercer Island based on those costs. And then we want to review a series of if this then scenarios with you that look at adding an elementary and or staying. I'll go through those with you as we get to it. So Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you with this slide. You all remember Ed who's working with me on concept design work.
And thank you. And again, I appreciate this opportunity to work on this. As Brandy said, we did a study similar to what we presented to you 2 months ago about middle school cost and area. Our point in doing this was to give you some rough order of magnitude data that will be useful for the kinds of scenarios that Brandy is going to present to you. They are definitely very meaningful and they are at the right level of detail at this point. But I want to also be cautious about that they aren't at a level that we would actually use for, say, planning a bond issue. Our task was to identify any full replacement of elementary schools in the Puget Sound metropolitan area since COVID. We wanted to find recent projects that would actually reflect current market conditions. We found 6. 4 that are complete and operating that you can actually go visit. And I did have the opportunity to visit at least one of them, and I plan to see the others. One that I'm very familiar with that is fully bid out and ready for construction, and another one that's near construction. And they're displayed in chronological order across the top there. They include 4 different, they represent 4 different school districts. And we think there actually are a pretty good, excuse me, a pretty good sample. We also applied some factors to the Northwood project to bring it up to date and give you again a rough idea of what it would cost if we were building Northwood today. And all of these are expressed in terms of 2023 construction costs. So that's an index that we have bring its use to it. So the results we got, which are in the first column of the shaded, the key data points that we're going to use going forward for a project. Oh, thank you so much. That again, this is total project cost, absolutely everything, all that the district would need to spend to bring these projects to the finish line. In 23 dollars, this is $927. Square footage per student is 140. And for the 6 projects that we looked at, the average enrollment was 643. And that was, all these were relatively consistent. I just want to be clear again what this data is and isn't. It's a good general guide. It's useful for the scenario exercise. Was there a question?
Oh, yeah, so the average enrollment capacity of the school dealer was 643. If the district were to continue with its smaller community schools of 400 to 450, presumably square footage would be reduced and overall project size would be.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that.
So, as I say, this data is good for what we're about to present today. If we're going to go forward with the bond proposal, there's some other points we would need to consider. Just every project is a little bit different. It would be important to look at what the Mercer Island School District program requirements are. What we found was that every district we looked at had slightly different goals for class size, how they handled special ed, how they handled a variety of things. Another big factor will be escalation. Again, we tried to do these in more or less current dollars, and we would need to build in a factor for that. What we discovered, not to our surprise, was that there's an enormous difference between projects that you would think would be identical based on the site. And the 2 of the Seattle projects, for example, when you get a chance, take a look at them. The Viewlands and James Baldwin Elementary Schools, they were built to have the same capacity, 650 students, to have the same educational program. And yet there's a tremendous difference in both the size of the building, square footage per student, and the cost. And that's attributable mostly to the topography of the site and whether or not they were able to keep the kids on site during construction. So that's what we found out. Brandy has done a whole bunch of work taking that data and applying it to some different scenarios. And I'm going to turn it over to her and have her run you through that.
Great. Next slide. Okay, so I have a lot of slides to cover here, and I know all of them are going to raise a lot of questions for you, and I hope that you'll just bear with me and let me get through these slides, hopefully answering your questions along the way, and then we can get to a discussion portion at the end. So if we take that average elementary and apply it to Mercer Island, we have a student enrollment design target of 450 or 600. We use the square foot per student of 140 from the average. We get 63,000 square feet for the 450, 84,000 for the 600. Then if we apply the 927 a square foot, we get an estimated December 23 construction cost of 58 million and 77 million respectively. Just interesting to note that if you build the 450, you need 3 of those schools for a total 23 cost of 175. And if you build 2, you need 2 schools at the larger amount for 155. I also wanted to just tie this back to the long range facilities plan. And what we estimated for the 450 was 72 million versus the 58 million and 92 versus the 77. There's a few explanations for that. One, the schools that you looked at do not include current seismic or energy code. And for example, in the energy code, you can no longer use gas heat. You have to do all electric and heat pumps and hot water via heat pumps. And so in the Northwood, or in the examples that we used in the long range facilities plan, we added a factor for that escalated it. We're also trying to be conservative, and give you a relatively high number that we knew we could meet. We don't know whether we would build on an occupied site or an unoccupied site, which will also drive that cost. So we're still well under what we said in the long range facilities plan, but those numbers will be affected. The other thing to think about at a 450 student school versus 600, there are no comps for 450. Nobody in Puget Sound is building a new 450 student school. So, you'd have to assume that the square foot per student would be higher in a 450 student school because a 450 student school has one principal and a 600 student school has one principal. A relatively similar sized gym would be built for 450 or 600. A commons is relatively the same. It's not proportional necessarily. So, I'm not saying it would be 160, but I just keep in mind that that square footage amount will change. The cost per square foot will be higher. A 600 student school has one job superintendent, a set of sanding cans, a job trailer, all of these costs, mobilization of each subcontractor that can be spread over a larger square footage. And as your project gets smaller, the cost per square foot goes up because all of those things still exist, but there's less square footage to spread it over. Again, it's not doubling the cost, but there is a factor to keep in mind with that. As I mentioned, the current structural and energy code are not reflected in the comps. Exercise shows the $20 million difference between 2 and 3 schools. And there are some inherent inefficiencies in a 450 student versus 600 student school. Next slide. So if we hypothetically said, what if we took an average elementary and Islander middle school? And what would the cost of that project be? If we took the range of dollars that we showed you for the middle school back in March, we had 67 million plus potentially 4.6 million for redoing the track and field for a total of 72. You see the 2 average elementary numbers there at $23, total of 130 and 150. If we escalate both of those at 5% a year, and again, we wouldn't actually apply an escalation cost to this until the time came to do that. But I can tell you that every general contractor that I'm working with on other projects is saying it's between 4.5 and 4.8 is what they're carrying at this point. So again, 5 is what we use in the long range plan. That's what we're going to use here. Would escalate the middle school to 92 and the elementaries to 82 million and 109 million. So a range of 174 to 201 for a bond that included just the middle school and the high school, or an elementary and middle school.
How many square feet is this assuming at the middle school for new construction?
It was the exercise that we went through back in March. So we took the average of the all of the middle schools that had been built. You can just go, it's that exact, it matches those numbers. So it was the average of the last 6 built in the Puget Sound area.
In terms of the added square footage, that's like 50,000 square feet, like.
I think it was like 58 or something. I think it's 58 plus a black box plus some storage, or I have to go back and verify what that is, but. And again, those are averages too. It's not going to be exactly that. This is, again, it gives you a sense of the order of magnitude. The other thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about this bond number is that there are some additional costs, right? We have to reimburse the design fees that we're paying to Malum and Bethune now, and cost estimating that we'll be paying. We have to reimburse that to the CapTech fund because that's where it's been funded from. And then in the long range plan, there were some must-do recommendations. So there was ADA and life safety issues associated with this building. And then there was any clean building compliance improvements that might be required.
This building and Lake Crest parking lot.
Yeah, that was one of the recommendations as well. I don't know if that was a must do. I think that the ADA accessibility in this building was a must do. And
I think the parking lot kind of meshed together
Right,
with
okay.
Crest, and Crest kind of has its own separate list of items, but the answer your question, parking lot.
yeah, we can price that as a single number.
Sorry, just since you stopped to answer a couple questions, when you said potential escalation, you mean like potential like increase in costs over the
Yeah, if you decide in November that you want to put a bond forward, we know that we're not going to be able to begin construction on that building for at least 2 years, right? Because we have the whole city permitting process, and we have the whole design, we haven't decided the building yet.
April.
What's that?
I think April is what's being discussed now.
Well, for the bond itself, but if you were to decide in the fall at some point, and the bond doesn't get placed until April, as Director Glowacz notes, we still need a couple of years.
Yeah.
Right, and in construction, what we always do is we price and they bid a project based on the midpoint of construction. So we're estimating here that the middle school would be 28 and an elementary school would be 30. You know, we can, that's certainly open for discussion, how we state that, but I think that's the earliest you could get the middle school done.
Thank you.
2028. Okay. And 2030.
Any more still.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, I think it's almost easier. I gave that to you just to give you a sense of what the escalation could be. It's almost easier to just say focused in $2023 and let the escalation be what it's gonna be. Okay, next slide. So I just thought, you know, at this stage, it's probably worth a reminder to all of us. It was good for me to reread this document that the board had approved in November of 23 regarding consolidation. So although we are giving you numbers of 450 and 600, the board clearly made a decision in November that this version of the long range plan was not going to consolidate elementaries, that we were going to stay at 450. So again, the numbers are there for comparison, but that's not a position short of a lot more community involvement that we want to take.
I think, I mean, do you have more to present on? I'm sorry?
I do.
Okay, I guess I just want to kind of put out there, I'm pretty concerned with the numbers and just think that it will be beneficial to our community to really kind of study this in depth and not wait until we're making a decision on buildings and maybe have some sort of committee that's going to be looking at capacity for elementary schools in general, not with anything specific.
Can you define concern, like concern,
The fact that-
how we got to the numbers or what?
No, the
numbers are
fact
coming in at?
I mean, I know there's substantial concern with having 450 capacity elementary schools in terms of staffing programs. Then, you know, building costs, and the fact that nobody else is doing it is probably for a reason. And I just think that, really being able to take the emotions out of, you know, a specific school site and really to the issue itself of what, with our current and projected enrollment, what is ideal for educational purposes, for staffing purposes, for building purposes, taking out, all, like I said, all the emotions in specific sites. What makes the most sense for our community?
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I'll just stop and I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so, you know, given that information, we wanted to provide you a few, if this, then what scenarios.
Top left block, if you're taking notes in this, the top left block.
So there's one scenario where we add an elementary, we defer the high school, and we finish the middle school. And I can see two ways to accomplish that. One is to pause the bond decision for a year to 2 years and figure out the elementary school. The other is to fast track it and stay on our current schedule. And that has a lot of consequences to it. And I want to talk, they both have consequences to it. So I want to talk those through. And then the other option that I see is the ability to stay the course with the middle school and high school, but then potentially do some additional components to this as well. So I'm going to go through those. So first one.
So that first top left one, there is a typo. It should say defer MIHS and finish IMS, not another MIHS. Sorry for the typo on this.
Okay, so in this pause the bond decision for a year or two, we would add an elementary, we defer the high school improvements to either CapTech dollars or future bond dollars. And we finish the middle school.
Why would this have to be paused for 1 to 2 years?
That's a great question. Next slide. Okay. If we, This assumes pause. The next one assumes we don't. Okay, so bear with me as we get to that next one. If we pause the bond for a year or two, I think we terminate the high school design work in June. We wouldn't take that any further. We complete the IMS design and schedule. We would engage an architect to study the elementary school sites. And we would engage the facilities planning committee about the change in direction, and we'd engage the community around the size and which school would be replaced first. There's a lot to that. The implications of that would be a disappointed high school community, staff, students, and families who've all been very involved in the process. The decision would be contrary to the community feedback, facilities planning committee recommendation, and previous board direction, in my humble opinion. There would be additional costs that would need to be incurred and paid by the CapTech fund to do the elementary design. Given that, we need to reassess the capital and technology projects for the next few years. We couldn't stay on the schedule of things that we've talked about. And maybe most importantly, the election would likely conflict with the EP&O levy that happens the next year. If you remember back earlier in the year, we looked at a matrix of all of the elections. And there's an EP&O levy next February, I believe.
26.
26. And then somewhere in all of this, there's a city bond issue for the things that they want to do for City Hall and other improvements.
But there'd still be like November of next year, February, potentially of 26. I mean, the expiration of our current bond isn't until like the end of 28. So.
The first
Could be.
ones.
Yeah,
Could be, yeah, and I said 1 to 2 years, it shifts it, but,
or it could be 6 months.
okay, next slide.
Or it's 4 months.
So another option would be that we fast track an elementary and we try and keep to this current schedule. If we were to do that, we would need the board to decide at the June 6th meeting, which elementary was going to be replaced and at what size. Then we defer the high school improvements to CapTech and future bonds. We finish the middle school. Next slide. To do that, we need to engage an architect on June 7th. The day after you decide, you tell us which elementary it's going to be. We'd have to study the site to determine if a new building could be built on an occupied site or if student relocation would be necessary. We'd need to determine the building layout and put together a cost estimate. We would have a compromised concept design. It would not be comparable to what we're doing at the middle school or high school. We terminate the concept design for the high school, complete the middle school. Implications, same disappointed community, same contrary decisions, same additional costs paid throughout a CapTech. I think the real challenge with this one is little, if any, staff. There's absolutely no way on the 7th of June to get any meaningful input from staff. And we also would then have 2 elementaries that were not being rebuilt, that there would be kind of the aftermath of that to deal with as well. And as I mentioned, the IMS project and the elementary school project would be at very different levels of development, going out to a bond. Next slide. Okay, so those are kind of what I see as the 2 options, and certainly there's some gray area around dates and exactly how you approach that, but it would be very challenging to do it and stay on schedule.
To do it and to keep to the April, although if we look at the end of 28 as the deadline, obviously lots of slots between now and the end of 28, including November of next year.
There are hundreds of other ways to do this at that level. These are not the absolute only ones, but we try to give you kind of some benchmark ones to contemplate as we're working within the timeline.
But I understand like an administrative to switch tracks for an April, you're saying that'd be difficult administratively, at least to have a fully fleshed out, sort of robust, perhaps, portfolio.
And community.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say this now. I'm frustrated with how much, thank you for all this information. It's excellent information. With the, I don't believe there's any board consensus on looking at an elementary school. And we had a plan to move forward and it's getting derailed by one board director giving administration direction, which is a violation of board policy. I think the general numbers are really important, and I think that they were talked about during with the committee. And then frankly, in our discussions, when we approved concept of going forward. So while this is all really useful, it's backtracking on decisions we've already made. It's basically, I don't need to repeat everything that Brandy said because it's accurate. And maybe that's my fault as president in terms of making sure that our superintendent is only doing what's directed by the board as a whole. But this is a huge issue for me. I appreciate that you have different opinions and that's great, but there needs to be board consensus and there can't be board direction given by one board director. Because it's issues like this. We're all now, I mean, they spent probably tens of hours on this information. And I don't think there's another board director or community member or committee member or administrator or staff member that wants us pursuing an elementary school right now. So that's a huge problem. And no, I don't want to hear your opinion because we know what it is and you're going to vote against it anyway.
No,
Even
it's
when
not.
all your questions are asked. But I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say that because this is outrageous to me that this presentation is amazing. You guys went up to a lot of work and I don't think there's a single board director that's interested in learning more about an elementary school.
Here's the reason I need to learn more, okay? And what I hear from voters. When I look at 2012 and 2014, it was overwhelmingly rejected in 2012, 2014 wildly successful.
We made
What-
a
okay,
decision,
what-
had a board
There
vote
was-
and moved forward.
There was no decision, there was no board vote. What was the
There
board?
was a
Can you show me
board
the board vote? There was consensus where we asked informally what the direction was from the board. There was no vote that I'm aware. So let me continue. When I look at 2014, that was overwhelmingly passed. To me, the logical question is why don't we do the follow-up companion bond to what was wildly successful in 2014, which also meshes with like the age of our facilities that are the oldest. 40% of IMS, we did 93,000 square feet, right? Maybe there's 50,000 left in an elementary school. Just the companion bond
But then you're
2014.
arguing for something that the community and committee have rejected.
I never heard it from the
So-
community.
Hey,
There's never been a vote.
here's what let me give you this perspective of why we went back to the long range facility planning committee, I believe in November. Following all the study sessions that we went out and we did the presentations at the community center, at the middle school, at Island Park and at the high school. What we heard from that and why we took back to the long range facility plan, the middle school and high school options is, it was very unpopular, as we explained, to talk about closing an elementary school at this time. The next, the rationale was it spanned the spectrum, but a lot of the thought was, don't mess with the elementary schools right now. We want you to focus on the middle school and high school. We don't know enough, our kids went through enough in COVID and having us think about either closing schools or kids having to move schools in order to build a school was too much at the time. That's what we had heard. That's why we took what we said back to you as the committee. And Director Glowitz and Director Lurie were the representatives from the board to that committee. So it was really I think from my perspective and what I heard from the community in the fall, perhaps it's changed, but at that time was just leave the elementaries alone, figure out what's gonna happen long-term, what is enrollment really gonna do, and then come back to us after you focused on that. That's why I'm bringing up.
Can I have a
Yes.
chance to say? I really appreciate all the work that you guys put into this, but I think that this kind of thing is exactly why, in general, direction has to come from the board as a whole. Because for me, as a board member not involved in agenda planning, I was just kind of sitting here going, this all sounds terrible. Like, I didn't think this was what we were planning on doing at all, right? Like, in large part because of what we heard from people during like the one session that I went to in person of Fred's like info sessions, was people were like, don't make my kid move schools. Don't mess around with elementary schools. These kids, you know, are still getting over COVID. There's still a lot of issues, like they're still doing a lot of catch up. And so like, none of this sounds good to me. You know, clearly, but I think that if there's kind of tension over this, it's partly because this question for you guys did not come from the board as a whole, right? So it's not something where the board was like, hey, let's look at this again, let's talk about doing elementary school. So I think that's why there's tension. It could be the best idea in the world, right? Like in terms of like, if you look at it 20 years from now, would we be glad to have built an elementary school over the next couple of years? Probably, right? You know, but in terms of what the community, when I think about the logistics, even the tiniest bit of having kids not be able to attend their home school for even a year, and it might be longer, and having to be in like trailers at another school, which I don't think that's where the community wants to go right now. So thank you for this. It's, if anything, it kind of like highlights kind of the rationale that we were going with before.
Christina?
I will say that I will move forward on the rest of the presentation because it's still relevant.
Yes,
I just want to be clear that my view, and every community member is entitled to their own, was not that the community said, we don't want to break ground on a renovated or new elementary school in 2028. It was that we do not want to consolidate next year. And those are very different things.
But I do remember, I do feel that we had a very strong sense of the board after this discussion several months ago, that we were going to give the elementary schools a break. And I think that there was strong board consensus on that. I was also a little surprised to see us reopening this issue, and I do think maybe not just directly relating to this, but in general, we need to figure out a way to weigh out staff time and board direction, just to make sure that we're not spending what I'm sure is much more than tens of hours on a presentation that comes as a surprise to the majority of the board, because it's not something we thought had been we'd already had a sense of meeting about it. So, I mean, I see Dan's frustration on this issue and his interest in like Passus Burlock having a successful bond, but I feel like it is useful for the board to know how the admin is being tasked on our behalf. And to maybe achieve that through consensus or some sort of like sense of the meeting versus a surprise.
Oh, we could have had a vote like on the plan.
But, you know, I will say that if I'm not mistaken, I remember we did have a vote. And we did ask students, the students did not vote that time, because it was one of the first meetings that we voted as me in the meeting that we were going to go forward on middle school and high school. And I think that maybe if we go back to the voting, I don't know if there's.
I think it's consensus.
But it's
was not a vote.
right, it's a consensus, that's a board decision. Is it a motion? No, but it is a decision, and it's how we function, and it's our norms. So we know what your opinion is, but we have to go, when we have something that we need to make a decision on how we're gonna proceed, we can either do it by motion or consensus. And they are both just as binding in terms of, we can change the emotion, someone can bring a modification of a decision we've made by motion in the past, anytime they want. So if someone can bring up the issue again, the issue is that there needs to be a motion in a second, or two board members who want it put on the agenda to have a discussion of before we take the time to talk about it. So I'm gonna pass it back to Brandy because of all the time and work, and it's excellent information.
There is an option to stay the course, right? The course that we're on, finish the high school identification, and the needs identification and prioritization and concept design work, finish the middle school design. And we are well on track to give you a recommendation and costs in the fall of 24. considerations. I mentioned that there would be a very disappointed high school staff. Both schools, and you're gonna see this on the 20th of June, have extensively engaged staff, students, parent groups, PTA booster clubs, principals advisory committees, literally hundreds of contacts by the architect at each one of the schools. Each one of the schools has an advisory group of about 12 school staff, students, and parents that have met multiple times with the architect to shape these projects and are starting to talk about, the real meat of prioritizing what the needs of the high school and what the design solution is at the high school. So I just want to emphasize for you how much work has gone into the process already. Next slide. That said, I certainly have heard in board conversations this year, Director Glowitz's point about balancing the bonds in a little bit better. And I'm not sure whether the elementary school conversation about that being added is about balancing the bonds, or whether it's more about an elementary school. But I think there's a couple of things that we might think about if it's about balancing the numbers.
Bottom right quadrant.
We could increase the funding for the high school, right? In the numbers that you saw for that, I think it was 119 million. We had about $20 million set aside for the high school. And you could increase that. It would, you could increase it significantly, which would complete the majority of the high school work in Bond 1. In theory, there would be little to nothing to be added to future bonds if you addressed all of the high school work in the first bond. It would reduce the cost of future bonds because you've taken a bigger bite in the first one. The 2023 long range facilities plan identified about $45 million in 23 costs. 43 million does not include any cost for the stadium or grandstand cover. We're not anticipating that needs to be done. We've had a structural engineer out to look at it. There are no safety issues associated with that. Doesn't mean people don't want to cover grandstand, but from a safety perspective, it doesn't have to be done. In the long range facilities plan, we contemplated spreading that need over 3 bonds, right? It wasn't all being done in the first one. It was the middle school and some of the high school. Then it was an elementary and some of the high school. So you could shift all of that into this first bond. And then just a reminder that, last major renovation of the high school was in 97. At that time, there was some new construction and some renovation construction. So for example, the gym is old and renovated, but the commons and the Performing Arts Center are new. We have a music addition that's new. We have additions at the end of each of the wings that are new. At the time, the admin area was built, it was renovated, the wings were renovated. So, there's this kind of hodgepodge of new and modernized construction, but even that was 97, right? And we are coming up upon HVAC equipment that may need to be replaced. I've given you a preliminary list, and if the architects saw that I shared this with you, they'd probably just have a heart attack because this has not been to the committee and it has not been vetted yet. But, what we're hearing in the need piece from the high school is things like expand radio and connect to the classroom, upgrade all of the science classrooms. They're 30 years old. They don't have the safety precautions in them. They're not laid out the way that they need to be. Replace HVAC, add a drama classroom that can serve small performances, renovation of the PAC and acoustics, add visibility from hallways, add visibility to the outdoors, add sound and visual reinforcements in classrooms to improve accessibility for all students, renovate art rooms, renovate restrooms, for some of the restrooms for all gender access, and the list goes on. And I show you that only to help you understand that those are not CapTech projects. Those are bond projects. And it will be up to the board to, sort of set the priority about how deep we want to go. But the need at the high school cannot be addressed with just CapTech dollars. And so if you defer it, or if you only fund a portion of it, there will be more to do in the future. Next slide.
Just one thing, I know there's been questions on the stadium piece, specifically around the seismic piece, and I know that you looked into that, told me do you want to just talk a little bit about the stadium and work that you did there?
Well, as Brandy mentioned, we brought a structural engineer in. And, you know, we looked at the situation, they don't feel that there's an immediate concern of what, outside of what normal. So, you know, aged concrete is going to move, I mean, it's just kind of what concrete does. But there was no immediate concern that we were, you know, saw any great fear of, you know, life safety like what we saw.
But if we do start to, I think another conversation, if we did start to make any changes to that, put on something, we're gonna trigger a bunch of other codes and whatnot at that point. Isn't that kind of the crux of?
Yeah, I mean,
If you do something, you're
The
gonna have to
seats
do
are the
everything.
retaining wall.
okay, that's exactly right.
Okay.
That entire seating area is the retaining wall for that upper area for the JV field and everything above. And as you mentioned, Brett, if we do look into some sort of a major grandstand cover or something like that, yes, that would all be part of a complete overall.
Thank you.
Is there a summary of that that should be included in the long range facility plan, just so we know that that? Cause that was a huge question, I I mean, I don't wanna see the whole, but just a summary of the findings.
We could get one from the engineer. He came out and looked at it with us and said, you're fine.
Right.
But we don't have, we could get that.
I mean, I just feel like that would be a good addition, so that when people, and then someone can ask for more information.
I think that'd be really helpful because that is a question I've heard from people.
Yeah, and we knew it was happening, so thank you for doing it. I'm kind of disappointed.
One of the things in terms of like sort of for a number that's not here, that's helpful for me at least for comparison is what $100 million, which is roughly, I think it was 98.5 or whatever. In 2014 is in today's dollars as adjusted for the construction index. My belief is that's right around 175. In terms of thinking about what would be a similar financial ask of the community that it overwhelmingly approved, 10 years ago.
I think you're really close with that number. So look, and I've got a comparison here for you. Can you go to the next slide? If we stayed the course and increased funding for the high school, implications, one bond for the high school rather than spreading the need over multiple, potentially one. I'm sure there'll be something that comes up in the future, but we could address the majority of the issues. Future bond issues would need to build 2 or 3 elementary schools, but they wouldn't have any other major attachments to them. Potentially fewer bonds, more consistent size. Other benefits, high school and middle school continue exactly as planned. Respects the community feedback, respects the facilities planning committee recommendation, and is consistent with board's position paper from November. Next slide. Another thing that we could think about is that we could stay the course and include funding for an elementary site study and concept design in the bonds. Thoughts about that. The needed elementary work would be acknowledged in the first bond. We wouldn't be funding it out of capital and waiting for bond to pass for it to be reimbursed. It would give us adequate time to carefully study each site and determine if an occupied build or relocation strategy would be required. That's important, and that might shape the decision about which school goes first. That might have a bigger implication for that. The other thing is, I think it gives us adequate time to carefully study new construction and the renovation question. If these are 450 student schools, is there a renovation that's possible and an addition that could be less expensive than that full new replacement? And there are things like energy code and things to consider, but certainly if you add an elementary now, there's no time to do that. But I think if you gave it the necessary time, you could spend some real energy around that. It gives us adequate time to engage the elementary communities. It's consistent with the changes we made in OE11, where we wanted to do an annual review of the building utilization and look at enrollment targets. And the future bonds would only need to build 2 or 3. And again, the benefits are consistent with kind of what we've talked about. So next slide is some numbers. So what would IMS, more work at the high school and front funding costs? If you take the same numbers we used for the middle school, $23 and 72 million. for the sake of argument, you say we have $60 million of total project cost improvements that we're gonna do at the high school. And we're gonna address everything, and you put $1 million into the front funding. Again, all those escalated at that same basic 5%, which is, you know, maybe not, we'll see where that ends up. You end up at 177 million. Next slide.
So similar to the scope of the 2014 bond, but different different projects, obviously.
And if you look at the IMS in an elementary, you know, the escalated numbers were 174 and 201. And if you look at this kind of different approach where we stay the course, but we do more at the high school. And we fund a really in-depth process for the elementary school decision, we're about the same. And interestingly, it lines up with about what you're talking about with that bond from 2014.
Brandy, does that 60 million include more for the high school option? Is that what you're talking about?
You know, I had done the spreadsheet at 60, and then I went back and pulled all the information out of the long-range facilities plan, and it was at 45. And I didn't have time to go back and update this, but you know, it could be less, and the 177 would be less. I feel like.
But this is the option you were talking about with all the sort of laundry list of.
Yeah, and I feel like knowing what was in the long-range facilities plan and having sat through the majority of these high school meetings, we're certainly hearing more than was in the long-range plan. So, you know, maybe that's a good hedge your bets on. And you know, that's absolutely subject to how deep the board wants to go. You could go 20 million, you could go 40 million, you could go 60 million, and anywhere in between. But again, responding, you know, in part, Director Golodz, to your thought about trying to balance these better, I think this could be a strategy that keeps us consistent with the direction we've taken.
I mean, the overall.
I had a question just about the track and field work at the middle school, and I apologize if we've heard about this already. Can you tell me a little bit, or maybe it's a Tony question, about like what needs to be done there? Like,
we included, first of all, you know, that track absolutely needs to be replaced, but we included the money here because we don't know what the design solution is at the middle school. And if the design solution means we have to place portables, in other words, we have to take more of the 100, 200, 300 building down to build the new building, then will allow us to house kids during construction. The only place to put portables is on that field. Or on the track. Maybe you can keep the field open, but you need to take the track. And so we just included money here to rebuild that track and field in the event.
and you mean afterwards, like basically when the portables are gone,
Yeah.
you correct damage, you get the kind of like okay, and then another question is, thinking about like where to put kids during construction. I find the idea of the two slides ago, the state of current course and add funding for future elementary planning now, I find that really intriguing as a concept, because I do like the idea of continuing to make some progress towards eventually beginning to replace our older elementary schools. I also like the idea that it would be like so much lead time that everybody would feel like they have plenty of chance to kind of get involved in the process if they wanted to be involved, but also being able to think really long range about like, if we were gonna do like school A and then school B, do we maybe make like school A a little bit bigger so that when we do school B, we can more easily move some of those kids into that school? You know, like if we find out, because you really want to know like everything you're dealing with. So if it turns out that school B, let's say, is located in a place where you can't really just move kids to the portables, then you want to plan for that as part of your overall, you know.
I think it really allows you to be thoughtful about the elementaries as a whole.
Yeah, and then for families, it's like if they know it's coming years in advance and they know this is the plan, like, 3 years from now, our kids' school's gonna get replaced, but we already know where they'll be. We can visualize it. They're gonna be in the extra classrooms at school A, or they're gonna be in this field of portables at school A, like that I think as a parent is a lot more reassuring. And for kids even, it's a lot more reassuring to kind of like.
And the committee that I was proposing, or the
Yeah.
discussion, would be I envision that as part of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly think the scope of your early question about a bond, 175 is reasonable for the aforementioned reasons. However, is also discussed, like, to me, and I guess we'll have to wait and see what Malum comes up with, it's the reason I abstained for approving that contract. The needs at the high school seem to me of perhaps less urgency than those at the elementary school. And I have difficulty seeing sort of how those projects can be prioritized, but still having room financially to be able to deal with the elementary needs. But in terms of the 175 and sort of numbers for an next bond, I agree with the size. I just have questions which, partly addressed. I mean, we could, and now I think it's clear, and rather than the high school, we could do an elementary. But I mean, that'll be for the board when we see the list of projects at the high school to sort of keep in mind. So thank you.
The other thing that as a parent of currently someone who's in late elementary school, right, is that for me, like if I'm voting on, if I'm not, imagine I'm not on the school board and I'm voting on this bond, I like that this is stuff that my kid is gonna benefit from, like not to be just totally like, Mercer. It's like stuff that benefits every kid on Mercer Island. And so like, even under the fastest possible plan, my kid will not benefit from like what's gonna happen at IMS, but she would be able to benefit from what's happening at the high school, whereas like otherwise it's like in reverse, like if I'm voting on stuff for the elementary schools primarily, it's like passing my kid by, so that's kind of a nice.
Also, I think reassuring the community that we're also updating things like the sign-up form, or if there's, if the priority is that robotics is taking over in academics, is there a space, or, so I don't know, all the priorities, but I think that will be beneficial to see, what are those and how that will bring us to the future of education.
Yeah, the high school improvements are huge educational implications. I mean, right now, there's not a functioning robotic space and I mean, that's just one example.
And a great example of that, as I've sat through these discussions, is also that the room that is being used for robotics really is very difficult to use for anything else. I think there's an English class that's in there, but it's not, right? So here we've got a space at the high school that is poorly utilized and only utilized by one group and doesn't really meet their needs anyway. So, do you renovate the robotics room, make it larger and make it more multifunction? So additional science or CTE classes can be taught in there and it can be used 5 periods out of the day. And there are several of those.
There's several, I mean, like another one is the black box and when drama uses the PAC as a classroom, it means no one else can use the PAC during those times. It takes out, anyways, it's, I had another point, but I don't.
I wanted to just jump on that thing about robotics, and then maybe your point will come back to you. Okay, just, and I said this, I think the last time we talked about this, but that I really like the idea of kind of continuity between the levels of our school system, right? So I love the idea of like, they're doing so much more with robotics now at the middle school. And so hopefully kind of as these ideas for improvements at the high school are kind of settled upon, that those will trickle down to the plans for the middle school, which then hopefully in the future, when we do elementary schools, will trickle down, yet again.
Right. And here's my point, thank you. I think that was, as a committee member, was the primary motivation for the recommendation of the middle school and elementary school was the need. And then the community spoke very loudly. So, so then that was altered. It's like, for all the reasons mentioned, okay, just step back. But I think that the planning part, I don't want to see us wait another 10 to 15 years to do the next project. I think this is an excellent way of moving forward. I wonder, my question is starting the elementary school planning, now beneficial, or is it like after we make a bond decision on this one and then start the kind of next step of planning, but making sure that we're clear on, when would be the ideal setup? Presuming that we have a proposal in November for a bond that includes the high school updates and my feeling is the more the better, because the need, and then it's such a huge project and going out for bond and blah, 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 like we might as well do as much, I want to say do it all, but do as much as we can. And the middle school, and we make that decision in November, when is the ideal time to start, you know, the elementary school conversation? Is it now? Is it November? Is it next spring?
The one we
I
have
think
money.
from my perspective, and I'm sure we all have different perspectives on this, but my perspective would be, make the decision in November. If you choose to put something on in April and you include dollars and the bond passes, then, you know, let us get those design projects kicked off and then come back in the fall of 25 potentially. And it might be a 2-year process, right? I mean, you have the time to work through it. You know, that beginning part may be architects studying those sites and really understanding what can happen. Is renovation a possibility? Is renovation in addition a possibility of 450? Will a 600 student school fit? What are the implications of that? I mean, there's a lot of work to do around that. And then maybe, you know, that spring of 26 or even the fall of 26, then, you know, start that community process. Yeah, but I think it would be good to get on, to do it sooner than later. I wouldn't put it off to the end of the middle school or, you know, any.
Well, and my main question was capacity for this team. And my lack of understanding of once a project is moving forward, I mean, I know how busy you are as part of that, but I don't really know. Like, I know it's an overseer role and, you know, you're meeting constantly and all that. Do you have capacity for an additional big project?
I think, again, I think we could start it in the fall after, I think, collect
25.
Yeah, in the fall of 25. we
The
could get that going.
26.
But, you know, based on, and maybe I have a little bit of PTSD from the community meetings, not as much as Fred, and I have a little bit. There's a lot to talk about, right? And to do it justice, you really need to be able to look at all of those different options. And it's not, I don't think it's a 2-month process. You know, I think it needs enough time to really work through and understand. And the other thing is that gives you, again, another year of enrollment data and potentially 2 years of enrollment data before you're really, you know, and even more time for things to settle out. So.
Question about the middle school, and maybe this is more for the architects, Ari Smithun. When it comes to construction techniques in terms of sustainability, as well as I have questions around making it either including air conditioning or being about like preferred to be added at a later point without cost. When are some of those questions, or when do those design questions like have to be, are made? Because I know like the plans that are, but again, maybe it's something more from Bethune, but those are the two sort of questions I have.
Yeah, I know, you know, we're looking at sustainability components with the building. We're looking at mass timber versus steel and, you know, what that means. I think any school that we design at this point, we're going to be asking that question about air conditioning. It's a little more complicated at the middle school because you have 2 different buildings. But
when we would be able to have an air conditioned, I mean, I understand that,
Yeah.
you know, well, the current state is what it is. But
except that our mechanical engineer was pretty progressive at the time we did the middle school, and that has a couple of very large air to water heat pumps.
Okay.
So there might be a version where we're able to cool the air not to 50 to send it out, but we can cool it to 65. And we're not, our next week, I think, is when a mechanical comes out to the building. But we're not sure whether we're gonna use the existing system and expand that existing system to feed the new building, or whether it would have its own standalone system. So there's some things to work out there, and but those are all good questions that once we get through this summer, I think.
And
come back
I
and
share
focus
those,
on the answers.
those concerns and those questions.
Yeah.
I also wonder about solar panels on the roof, like for the new part of the middle school, whether that's something that will even be considered or looked at.
We are at the 99.9 kilowatt hour limit before we become our own utility.
Oh my gosh.
And are regulated as a utility.
Yeah.
Both Northwood and IMS.
Yeah.
I don't know if rules have changed on that at all, but we have so much power generation there that. At
It's
least
a good
put
problem.
them on. It's a good problem.
Yeah, okay.
But definitely for air conditioning. for me.
I agree.
Yeah, that's definitely what it's about.
We're thinking of 70-year facilities,
Yeah.
climate change,
For sure.
the ability for future boards. If there's a regional sort of movement towards year-round school to making that a possibility, then I think sort of being a good steward of the facilities is certainly.
Absolutely.
Yep.
You know,
Totally.
addressing that and being thoughtful about it.
Totally agree.
One of the things, it's kind of taking us back just a second since there's kind of a pause here. I think it's easy to forget what the condition and age of the high school is relative to the elementaries because we've put additions onto the high school, because we have done some big renovations in the 500 hall. But that 100, 200, 300, 400 administration suite, that was a 1997 renovation and remodel. Our elementary schools were 95,
Maybe
some
four, I think.
4 or 5. So
3 years.
all of those portions of the facilities are pretty comparable when we're thinking about, where they are. And I think, remembering that there are some things in, especially those science rooms or whatnot, that we really need to take a look at. And I think that's what's coming out in those meetings. I'm not in all of them, but that's what I'm hearing is some of it is just those classrooms are as old as our elementary classrooms in some ways. So there's some desire, knowing that we just don't have the space to go build a new high school. We're always gonna just have to renovate on site. How do we do that over the next several years?
We also heard when we were visiting there recently, right? Like we heard about classes having to be limited, right? Like art classes being limited because there wasn't enough capacity to store glass work projects for 2 classes or more ceramics projects. So it's like our kids are actually missing out on educational opportunities because of the limitations of our space.
And that was one of the questions that the architect asked is what can't you teach?
That's
So,
right.
right, what is the facility preventing you from teaching? And so that'll be interesting for you to hear on the 20th as well.
Thank you.
Any final questions?
Even though we.
Oh, wait, is
Yeah.
there more?
No, there's not. Miss Leslie, and yeah. So I think though that we would really appreciate some direction. And maybe you've given that indirectly, about which path we should be on, because if the elementary is in play in any way, we have a lot to do and react to in order to make that happen.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for all of your hard work putting this together, because even though the board as a whole did not specifically ask for this kind of analysis, it actually just for me really reconfirmed the direction that we were on already, the path that we were on. So that was very helpful. And I think it also will be helpful for people in the community if they, well, why don't you do it like this? And why aren't you this like, you come go back and watch this. So for me, like the clear winner from my point of view is the stay the current course and add funding for future elementary planning. Like that's it. I'm very comfortable with the numbers. I'm comfortable with that notion. And I think it really like addresses the most important things first.
Christina?
I did everything she said. So, and I appreciate all your work. I think that there's a lot and it really helps out to see everything together. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same. I was a fan of Stay the Course, but I can very much see the value of really taking a good hard look at our elementary schools and figuring that out. I might be third on the list of PTSD from the closest school decision. So I think it's, the more thoughtful and studied approach that we can take with the community, the better. And I don't feel like this is something that we should be rushing in any way.
Dan?
Thank you for the additional, information. I think it's valuable. I still have questions about priorities, which I don't think will be answered until we actually see like cost and potential projects at the high school. And still, just looking at the age of the facilities, that's sort of what, to me, looks like a sustainable path. But in terms of the overall numbers, I agree with them in terms of the cost, scope, it's a matter of priorities.
I like to think of the addition of the planning for elementary as stay the course plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't impact us right this moment, you guys, right this moment. I think it's a great plan. I think that, I'm really curious to see what you bring to us with regards to the high school, just because that one is the one with the questions. Middle school, I'm excited about too, but that one's much more. And then,
Much more what?
much more set, yeah, I mean, I think the only issue is gonna be size. Right, and then I assume that that's been part of the discussion with architects is in terms of how many classrooms and size and all that, so. Yeah, my recommendation is stay the course plus, or that's my opinion, and it sounds like we have consensus and that's a decision the board is making, so. Thank you so much. I actually, you know, I wanted to get our superintendent's opinion on it as well, if everyone's okay with that.
I think what I like about adding, I've been a proponent of the high school, middle school projects, that came out of the long range facility planning committee. What I like about the addition of that extra money for the, middle school, yeah, in just one other addition to that is, I think it also sends the message to the community that our long range facility plan is not static. And that there are plans to continue moving forward, not in any grand way, but in a pragmatic way to move us forward. So I definitely am in favor of that. I'm also in favor of continued community conversations, because as hard as some of those meetings were, it wasn't what people were passionate. They reminded us how much they love their schools. They reminded us how much they value education. And I still get comments. I just had one down in the Island Park parking lot yesterday when I was down there from a parent that rolled down the window. And
That could go any number of ways.
yeah, right. Exactly. But you know, people could tell that it was hard to be up there, but they were grateful. And in the end, it wasn't that it was hard because people were attacking or anything personally. People are just passionate, but that, I think as a board, in what you listened to during the listening sessions, selecting a next superintendent, holding me accountable to that communication, us going out to engage, I think built a bit of a bridge. And that's gonna be important when we go forward to pass levies and bonds and continue to keep our school district together. So whatever we choose to do, that will be absolute priority, is those outreach meetings and working with the community.
Okay.
Wonderful. Let me thank you for the.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And PTSD is post-Tony.
Well, it's because the contract, Tony's not going anywhere, right, before these
You
projects. are
handed me
done.
a 35-year certificate yesterday, I'm sorry.
The fine print, Tony, yeah, well, as soon as you get to 45, then it's fun, yeah, then we'll talk.
I'll talk that through with Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Let's,
Yeah, we're good on the break. This
Yes.
next one, I think
we'll be,
we can still get in by quick for sure.
let's pick 10-ish.
Is that too long?
10, is that, I mean, do what you need to do and then come back, and, but within 10.
I just have a relatively hard stop.
Yeah. What?
I just have a relatively hard stop at 12, so
Okay.
I have to get back on.
Yeah, I think we're good.
We're on track.
Cool. stop at 12.
For me,
And our last item on our agenda for today is to talk about legislative board policy 1005 priorities and the lead rep position. Not sure who to pass this to. I mean, okay, I just wasn't sure
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of the policy, so.
pass it back.
Pass it to whoever you want. I'm passing it to our legislative representative, Jody Lee, who will be running this portion of the meeting.
Okay, one thing I wanted to bring to our attention, as you know, I am the legislative rep, started in, let's say, December, probably January because of my personal schedule, but, and it's a one-year position. And as I brought up at our last board meeting, just to give you the heads up and put on your radar, I had done some talk with the other legislative directors in our area and with Fred about the idea of potentially moving to a 2-year legislative representative. Right now, I'm talking about the position, not priorities, by the way, in case you're wondering. Moving to a 2-year legislative representative position and one that starts in June. Because that will give future legislative reps the summer to build relationships and really get on board with our legislative priorities. And what's happening instead of coming in the middle of a legislative session, which is what you do on the traditional sort of December schedule. And my thinking in this project was to say, there'll be a person who's in the position and then someone comes in with the understanding that it's a 2-year term for both. Of course, you know, that's some flexibility should people choose to take another role on the board or if there's an election happening or whatever, but there would always be a more established experienced legislative rep and one who is coming on board and building connections and learning the ropes to take on a more mentor role for the next year. And so I proposed this at the last meeting and then Fred and Michelle were kind enough to work it into our language a little bit. And that's what you see before you in the holiday colored draft here. So essentially it would be a meeting in June, the legislative rep would be selected in June for a 2-year term. And then and so I, as existing legislative rep, would step off next June. So I would have an 18-month term instead of a 2-year term. And we would sort of move it on from there. This is the sort of different boards in the area do it different ways. Some have a less established, more sort of understood mentor progeny, which is what am I thinking that mentee? That's my word, but you know what I mean.
That's a
Yeah.
mentor mentee.
It's supposed to be.
The one.
I always see it here, but I think it is.
See it, but I don't think it's Yeah. Anyway, so like some yeah, exactly. So different boards do it a different way, but I think this would best serve our needs on the island, especially as we are that our current legislative reps are very local and as a chance to really build connections and understand their legislative priorities. Rather than coming into a hot soup already, you get a chance to be a boiling broth.
Yeah, like, I mean, I guess just one question is like, was the thought like maybe for this year, I mean, I understand in terms of the 18-month for you,
Yeah.
but if Maggie, Ty, or Christina was like interested in fulfilling like that other position, would the idea be to wait a year or to fill it this June? So there was.
So
10
they would
people.
fill in, this is why I'm sort of like bringing this to you now,
Yeah.
that we could then at our next meeting be like, yeah, that's a good idea, let's, thumbs up. And then someone could be selected this June to come in so that we would have 2 going into to the next legislative session.
An Asha and an Ava.
Well, an Asha and an Ava, if you will. Yeah.
I like this idea. I think it's like, I like the way it's written out. Nice job, everybody. It's flexible enough to accommodate, like if somebody needs to change roles, like if somebody needs to serve as vice president or president,
Right.
or somebody drops off the board or whatever, like then it's the way it's written, then the board would just elect to replace that person. And obviously you would just move up. So if you were like the junior, if you were like the junior ledge rep in training and suddenly the senior ledge rep needed to take another role or wasn't able to perform their duties anymore, then presumably the junior one would like become the senior one and then someone else from the board would become the junior one.
it seems flexible.
I think that every board can make up its mind in terms of, you know, who is in the position, what capacity they have to do things. I would love to see that not happen as much, and I think the benefit of having two people is, there's certain roles that are less stringent time commitment than others, and I think that serving both, you know, vice president is much less time consuming than president. And so to be ledge rep for 6 months and vice president, I don't think for most people would be overbearing. And less, because there's two people also,
Right.
to balance that work. And, you know, it's an issue of capacity. And as I've learned over the years, we all have very different capacities. But again, for future boards to decide, it's on an individual basis. And as long as there's flexibility, I think this is great. One of the things serving as ledge rep is, you know, as you get your feet under you, then you're past it, as you get your feet under you, really understand some of the issues and build relationships, which is most important in advocacy, is, then you're passing it on. And that seems counterproductive, because then we're basically like spinning our wheels and going through the same things over and over. So
And you're passing it on right before the legislative session.
right,
starts.
where the bills have already been proposed, and this is the interim time where those things are happening. And to be able to build those relationships and say, what are you working on, what are you thinking?
And it also tracks the school year, which is nice for a variety of reasons, you know, but it also has just listening to you talk about it made me realize it also has the benefit of producing more connected board members who know our legislators better and who will continue to kind of have clout and contacts and be able to say, hey, this is really important, you know, like, so it's just beneficial all around. Like, I don't see any downside to it.
And it is a huge learning curve. So I think passing the torch in this way is, it just makes sense. It's because there's so much to learn, and the mentor-mentee aspect of it, I think, is huge.
And it's also more inclusive because a lot of board members who, especially who are new, may feel very intimidated by the idea of kind of like going up a level and kind of dealing at the state level. And so this makes it much more accessible for everybody to serve in this role.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I think like, I also like the idea of like experimenting and, you know, it doesn't, I think the reason
We're not
for,
down to it,
yeah, like I think the reasons for, you know, the rationale for trying it, like are persuasive, and if we find out like it doesn't work as we thought, we can always change it, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess, are we,
Just go on the consent agenda, or-
I think we should, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think it needs to go on the agenda.
Yeah.
Not consent
Okay.
agenda, but whether or not we have a big
Yeah.
discussion is
Yeah,
fine,
agreed.
because I know how busy our two
Yeah,
meetings.
I would recommend that, well, we can do one of two things, no matter what, it sounds like you want it on the actual agenda. If you also want to select the person on June 6th, we'll need to put it up to the front of the agenda so that you pass this first and then you can take action. If you want to do it on the June 20th, when, that's the meeting where we start in a regular session and then go to a study session, we can do that too.
I would say June 6th, I mean,
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's
busy,
getting
but I don't, is anyone anticipating a significant discussion?
No.
No, I think we have it.
Okay, I just think in terms
Yeah,
of transparency
Yeah,
and
yeah.
having it in public.
We'll put it on the front.
And my plan is to defer Jody to you to go through basically your presentation.
Yeah.
I mean,
I just want to say for the sake of transparency that I'm not able to take on the role of junior ledge rep this year because I'll be starting my PhD program in September, so I'm gonna be just like keeping my head above water, I think.
I think the only perhaps addition to think about is if we just want language that there can be a vacancy. Like, I mean, that we don't, like,
Yeah, we're not
like,
required.
that we're not required to have to. I mean, to sort of address like in sort of on a go forward basis, but might be tough, but like, I don't feel strongly about it in terms of like, I think, you know, in terms of clarifying, there could be perhaps a vacancy.
So why don't I just say,
Consider.
if a board member, I'm in the first paragraph under the new proposed language. Last sentence, sorry, it's the smaller font. If a board member is unable to continue to serve as a legislative representative, a replacement
May be a
may be elected at the next, or will be elected at a regular, or may be elected
at a future meeting.
at a regularly scheduled meeting.
But there's still like, we slightly different in terms of someone, if it's not a replacement, but anyways, like, just that, it can be, there can be an unoccupied
Right.
spot, and
Yeah.
that's fine, like, you know, we don't,
We
But the
will
intent-
for sure.
yeah,
But,
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like it.
Thank you.
We can wordsmith it, or.
Yeah, I think maybe covers it. It's like,
Yeah.
if the board wants, which probably they do.
Yeah, and then we can always just, dip out of this if we don't like it after, whatever.
Yep.
But I think it'll be, and then Mary's thinking like, the makeup of our particular board and our different sort of learning styles and connections that we have will also like shockingly different, that I think that the Venn diagram of our abilities and our connections are so like, it's like a little daisy, so I think it would be, it's useful to have at least two perspectives and two universities.
That's another reason.
Well, and also, it's our committee, right? It's our committee of two.
Right,
In terms of bringing policies to the board, right? Not already done, but proposals, where there's a standing committee where that work is done, where it often is overwhelming for one person to do. But when it's the continued work of the committee, the legislative committee, then it just feels more manageable.
And reason number like 25, why this is a good idea is we're less likely to miss stuff.
Right,
Yeah, two pairs of
I mean,
eyes.
our advocacy has gotten stronger and stronger over the years, and this, I just think is a great next step.
Yay. Okay, great, thank you guys.
And on that,
Next item just is to surface any ledge priorities. We are gonna return to this on June 20th for your discussions. But I think that, you wanted to start, just brainstorming, not getting into the exact details, but maybe what are the topics? Then we can put those on the agenda and give you more background information. I provided you, if you'll go to that, in today's agenda, a link to a document that I started, that we can then update along the way. It went through WASDA, WASA, WEA, WASBO, all the alphabet soup groups in the state. And just gave you what were their 2024 priorities. And in the case of WASA, they've already published their 2025 priorities. Not because this is what you need to adopt, but so contextually what's happening in the state as you're thinking about yours, and what your legislative priorities are gonna be as a school board.
So I thought, if it's all right, like, I had 6 that came to mind and sort of preparing for this meeting. And this is something, at least my perspective, it's where it's a priority for our board that isn't already represented by some of like the state entities and levels where I think there's a lot of attention to issues. So it diverges a little bit from sort of the state level.
Yeah.
For me, one is being able to pay a living wage, which is also another way of saying regionalization and preserving the current regionalization rate. 2 is any tax relief for school construction is universal and no districts are excluded. 3 would be state support for staff diversity initiatives, both with respect to race, ethnicity, as well as sex. Where male instructors are underrepresented. 4 would be the discussion of University of Washington perhaps being included as part of like the Washington Scholars, the Guaranteed Admission Program. Understanding that it might need to be adjusted in terms of those requirements vis-a-vis the other schools. But I think the peace of mind it gives students to know that if they satisfy certain requirements, they have a space in a university is very provides a sense of security. 5 at the state level would be, I think, increased internship opportunities in the summer, particularly as it pertains to sort of extension of CCR. There's a lot of attention of CCR in the schools, but I mean, summer is sort of the natural time for those to be when you have summer internships, and I think the state could be doing more to support that. And then 6 would be energy efficient schools and making sure that all districts, climate change is a global, a state level issue, that we're not excluded from benefits that otherwise, that are given to other schools. And that any carbon removed from the air is carbon removed from the air, whether it's from a district in King County or a district in other parts of the state.
And then I would add, I think that I think those are great priorities. And I think the diversity initiative is something that I hadn't considered. Especially when we like the project agenda, that's very interesting. And speaking as someone who will have a rising junior, I'd love to have it. UW was forced to accept our students when they met some standard, but since I don't seem to accept many students at all anymore, I guess that's, we can wish.
And some universities, I think in other states do this, and obviously we do it with a lot, so as I said.
It is off topic, but let me rant, I could rant forever about like us not having our flagship university open to, students. I would add special ed, like the adequate funding and support for special ed students in general, and especially for sort of the inclusion work in the classrooms to make sure that our educators are adequately trained and staffed to have successful inclusion in the classroom. And of course, like that MSOC with the insurance and utilities, I think that we can just hit that again and again, because it is, the funding gap there is both ridiculous and unsustainable, I think. And then I was just also with the regionalization and the construction, the sort of like perennial, somebody fixes now these issues for us. Greg, did you have more that you wanted, that I was missing?
Not necessarily, I mean, the MSOC, I think one that is included in this, but maybe to call out, it, goes back to what is the prototypical school model and what's the overall funding of the prototypical school model. That continues to impact our levy tremendously. But the living wage regionalization piece, is similar to that. And then the one that you'll see, who knows, come up and with regard to bonds is going to be, will there ever be movement from 60 to 55 or 55 to 50? And I know that you haven't taken that up as a huge discussion, but I know there's been differences of opinions as a board as to whether or not to take that up, but that's been something else that's been discussed, and you'll see that come up in some of the other entities. Not that you have to do what the other groups are doing, we need to do what's best for Emma.
Is the movement to get UW to join that kind of consortium of schools, is that like a thing that exists, like a movement that exists already, or is that just like?
Well, I think it doesn't, which is the reason I think it needs a voice, and, and understand that if those requirements are perhaps different for the flagship school, but I think it's something, particularly looking where 90% plus of our graduates go to four-year schools. The other states do it,
Yeah.
and I think it's something that not enough attention has been paid. I mean, we could do it as a state, and there's nothing that prevents us, and I think it would be a huge benefit to our graduates.
Yeah, I just don't
Size,
know how,
money.
right, I just don't know if UW has capacity to guarantee admission to that many additional students when they're already like oversubscribed to a lot of their programs, and then like it would affect their finances, right? Having because right now out-of-state students pay more, so if you were to say I'm not, I think it would be great if it could happen, but like if you were to say, all spots that all Washington State students who meet these criteria can have these spots first, which would be nice too, right? Then you're losing a lot of out-of-state students, which would affect their finances, so I just I don't know how realistic that is, I'm not opposed to it.
But I think in my experience with other states is the flagship is typically not included. In fact, I haven't seen one where it is.
Like University of Michigan, it's definitely not.
University of Michigan, not, the schools are not.
Florida was, I think, which is what was
Okay.
considered.
I think the majority, the ones that I know of are not, and maybe University of Florida is, but they have many campuses, and at ours, the other UW. Like UW Tacoma is certainly included.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities, and I'm happy to have a discussion. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I just think the reality, I would rather focus on
Yeah.
our little bit of on things that actually we can change, because I think it's an issue that needs to be brought to the attention, but and also the way the UW, there's so many issues with UW right now that in terms of having to apply into schools and the limited numbers, and until they actually get computer science to represent the numbers of interested students who want to do that, It's just, frankly, it could be setting our kids up to fail,
Right.
because they can't then do the things that they want to do, so what's the point of going?
Actually, what about that? What about expanding the,
It's so far beyond what we.
I know.
Well, I mean, I guess one of the thoughts, I mean, for me, it's not just the flagship university, it'd be, you know, how do we, is there a role, like at the state level, where we can advocate, where there's a more determined, set, knowable path that removes some of the anxiety of where students can go, you know, upon graduation? And so like, one of the things, you know, I wish they would consider at the state level is like, you know, a regional, you know, pact or consortium of like schools where it's guaranteed admissions, not just, you know, to many of the schools within University of Washington, but could we have with Oregon or some sort
There
of.
pretty much is, any school that's WUI, which is an amazing, the western states in terms of tuition. Any student that's gonna qualify for the automatic admission is going to get into the WUI schools, that's just reality. I mean, Oregon State, Arizona State, a lot of the Cal State schools, the Hawaii, I mean, the students who are going to qualify for those programs are going to get into those schools and they benefit from in-state tuition. We have more graduates this year, my understanding is that we've got more kids going out of state than staying.
And they get that in-state.
And they get in-state
Well, I
tuition
mean,
at
the
the
way
WUI schools.
I mean, I guess, I mean, we'll
WUI
expand it,
school-
like.
Well, I just think I totally agree with you, but I think that's a federal issue and it's so far beyond our scope that it would be, I mean, if anyone, I mean,
But
like,
public universities are state, I mean,
Right.
in terms of it is a
I
state.
mean, I feel like this is something that we can all agree we wish would
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah.
but that is not, I mean, I don't feel like it's something I can focus my energies on as a legislative just because I don't think it would ever happen. I mean, I just, you know,
And
I
I think
it's
that's,
just,
I love it, but if we put it in a big picture and a long-term goal, seeing it, how can we break, if that's our objective to start with the prototypical shade, like advocating for that, which will trickle all the way to how we fund the university too, and having more fun. So I think that it is also like it's a marathon. So which one are our priorities that will meet our immediate needs, but also will have the biggest impact in 20, 30 years that we can change the educational system in a way that will benefit our grandkids.
or can we get more funding for things that will help our kids with, while they're in high school, that will help them with their, you know, college planning?
It's everything together, and I think that should be a goal that we have to achieve. So if we start with that, probably we'll have the same direction from legislators, but if we have it in our back burner, saying like, if we can't want to get there, which steps do we have to advocate first to get there? And I agree with you 100% that it should be.
I guess another way that one can think of it is just how do we extend the guaranteed admissions
Yeah.
program to be able to remove some of that anxiety and uncertainty, you know, for our graduates, right?
I think it's out there, as someone who just went through all this. It's out there, I think what we can do as a district is educating our families. And with, you know, the college and career readiness program and our college, what's Chris's program called?
Called the career counselor.
Yeah, our college and career counselor. Like I said, I mean, for example, my daughter's going to Arizona State. We're gonna be paying less than she would if she was going to UW, much less. And that's even without a WUI major. And every WUI school has different criteria. Some it's by major, some it's everybody, some you have to apply into, some if you're a major, it's an automatic, it's automatic WUI if you do certain majors. So she's doing one thing and it's not WUI, but she could easily switch to something else, which is basically the same, and it's automatic WUI. So I think for us, for our purposes, it's an education, thing. There's also, you know, a lot of these state schools, like another one, for example, that because I went through it, is, you know, a lot of these WUI schools also do rolling admissions. So you get your application in October, you're gonna get an answer a week or two later. And it just takes all that pressure off. They know they can still apply to other places. But it takes, I mean, that's the number one piece of advice that when people ask me, what do you want to do? Get that one,
Right.
take the pressure off before others are even due. and then you have it. And it's the same thing with the guaranteed admission, but it basically functions the same way.
Yeah.
So to me, let's focus on educating our community and our juniors and seniors in terms of, here are ways you can make it less stressful. Here are ways you can make sure that you're, really taking advantage of every enrollment and financial.
And
opportunity.
not bankrupt your family in the process.
Not bankrupt your family in the
my-
process, and we learn so much from each other, and I really, I'm thrilled with our, new position that Chris Kenyon had this year, and in terms of being able to, we learn so much, and then we're gone. And just making sure it's the mentor-mentee relationship is making sure that information is passed on.
So what go ahead.
I was connected to things, so maybe in the priorities, and I saw it here between all the ones that are mental health might be something that will be important to advocate. I'm thinking also with the report that we received of how fifth graders are seeing and pressure. And will help us also use that conversation to the legislators. This is stressful, we need mental health because we need it in the middle school, but also this is a stressful kind of the meetings and how are we gonna make this in the future? And it's a way in also to find out different goals that we have. But I have a question regarding the energy efficient.
Can I just make a suggestion of on this topic before you just change it? Is, one thing I think that would be, we can discuss it, but one thing that would be more beneficial than talking about like UW only is like asking the legislature for funding for future planning, whether it's college or career, as they do the pathways. And this would kind of fall into it, is making sure that we actually have funding to support our students rather than, at least in our community, people dropping $10,000 a pop with a private counselor. If we can get funding from the state to, expand our college and career counseling.
And to expand our support for families, because I think that there's stress, not just for the students, but there's a lot of stress for parents, having gone through it, twice now simultaneously.
Right.
Like, I think that there's a lot of this kind of informal mentoring that you mentioned, like where it's like you hear from your friends, kind of thing. But there's so much information out there that people just are not aware of. So like my good friend's kid is going to Western Washington University in the honors college, which is this like tiny liberal arts college, basically like in the center of the state university. I wish I'd known that existed. I didn't know anything about that until this year. It's like there's so much information that parents would really benefit from. And I'm not saying I know how to do it. Like I don't have any specific ideas, but I do think that I think that parents are really wanting, thank you for introducing this topic, honestly. I think that parents are really wanting guidance and reassurance. And it's true that a lot of parents go out there and spend a lot of money on this island for college counseling, where is there some way that we could be meeting their needs better as a district? Like, is there some way so that they don't have to do that,
Well, and
They could be donating that money.
just to give a couple of examples of that is honors colleges. I mean,
Yeah.
every big university has an honors college,
Yeah.
the state ones at least.
Yeah.
And they provide amazing priority registration every semester,
Right,
guaranteed housing
Lovely,
together.
yes,
As an honors college, it's we've got kids this year going to
Yeah.
schools on the East Coast, big, state
sure,
universities,
BBA.
100% scholarship because they're at the top of the class and they're selected as a scholarship. I mean, we don't talk about, that is not known.
Yes.
And it is a huge resource where you're basically, like, do you want to be one kid in, 6,500 who are, elite?
Yeah.
Or and I mean that in a good way, or do you want to be like, 100 in a class of 10,000?
Right,
Where you get all these amazing benefits. So, I mean, there's huge, it's astronomical, the
Yeah.
benefits that the honors programs give.
And it totally agrees. I mean, one thing to consider in terms of, because it is at the state level, it includes higher education, would be, support for the honors programs at, colleges and universities within our state. Because, also my impression is frequently phenomenal, right? And like, I know that like, at least peers who went to UW honors program and got like a very, very well regarded, like excellent education. But I mean, I think as a legislative priority, we could do something along support for honors programs with, within the state programs.
And just to build on what we're talking about, I'm sorry, Christina, I know you have another point. Just, if we're educating our community more, providing more information to our community, I think it's important that we think about our parents who have not gone through the US college system and how like incredibly confusing that can be. And I know that we have a school board director who has not gone through the US college system or applied to them before it's a weird and crazy process.
Weird is,
Yeah.
it's strange.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who haven't done it in 30 something years are also confused by the current process, but I can't imagine not having gone through the process at all. And I think we have a sizable number of students in our schools who have parents who have not gone through the American college system. But I think that a good sort of like primer of, more information and
It's
basic.
completely different, that you,
Yeah, it's hard to-
I mean,
yeah.
yes, that's huge, but then also us,
Yeah.
like trying to guide our
Yeah.
kids in.
Yeah.
I mean, graduating from
Taking out the
here,
typewriter,
UW
handling
was the safety,
Yeah.
it was a safety school, and now we've got plenty of 4.0 kids that didn't get in.
Yeah.
And, lots.
It's hard to know though how to kind of help parents learn about this stuff without it seeming like pressure, right?
Right.
Like, you don't wanna have like a college information, session for like second graders, because people will be like, oh my gosh, those people on Mercer Island are crazy, they're like coaching second graders on how to get into college. But I actually have people ask, whose kids are in kindergarten, asking me what they should be doing to like, think about college, right? And I'm like, ooh, but it's like, but people have these questions, like, so if their oldest kid is, like starting middle school, people have these questions, and so I don't know, I lay that out there for you, Fred, as like, not that you don't have enough on your plate already, but like at some point, it would be a great thing to just even look at, maybe like, I know the last thing anyone needs is another committee, but like, like talking to parents, surveying parents, what would be helpful to them, especially maybe talking to, I'm not saying you. I'm just saying like, something to think about.
Counseling Center
Yeah.
last year
Yeah.
developed checklists
Yeah.
for each grade.
Yeah.
So 9th and 11th, 12th, and 9th grade is primarily, figure out what you love, get good grades,
See, that's great, I didn't know about that, so
There,
maybe it's
if you go on the
communication.
website, that's there. I don't know that there's one for middle school, but I think that actually would be I think that would be a great addition too. And basically also a reminder of grades in middle school don't
Yeah,
count. So, I mean, just knowing all those things, but there is that for the high school now, and it was
That's great.
recently developed, and I think it's a huge resource for people, but I don't know how widespread understanding that it's actually there.
Yeah.
I mention it.
Christina?
I'll put a pin in and come back.
Yeah,
You
and
go.
then, yeah,
So maybe, thinking on the environmental and efficiency, try to see where are, the roadblocks from the legislator for us to be more sustainable. For example, if it's, by adding more, solar panels, we cannot do that because we become a utility. So maybe they have to change the rule that we can actually be more sustainable.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
well, they have a law that will be more sustainable.
Yes,
But
yeah,
it-
but
no,
no,
but if-
but,
yeah.
and I know
No, but
that.
I'm agreeing with you.
Philips Energy probably will lobby against it maybe, but find different.
But that seems like a
Or
very
maybe not, sorry.
specific goal to lobby for.
Yeah, I
I
didn't say,
totally support that.
that I think that the world is changing, climate change is
Yeah.
a reality,
Yeah.
and we all have to do our part. And, that doesn't mean that we will be ever, I don't think that we'll ever be independent from utilities. But as construction changes and demand of electricity will increase with, fires and hotter summers. We need to see what are the roadblocks that we can change right now that might help us also,
Well, I guess like one of, like, for an example, is I think all districts should be incentivized
Yeah.
financially to
Yeah.
adopt sustainable practices. But if we look at, for instance, electric buses, because of the cutoff of the model year, there was no financial benefit to our district for undertaking the expense of buying an electric bus. And so, to me, like a legislative priority, we simply that all districts are financially incentivized to adopt, sustainable practices. And that there be a financial incentive, I mean, not just the right thing, I mean, obviously, that's a huge motivation, and we decided to do it despite the lack of financial incentives. But I think that would be helpful towards getting us towards a more sustainable future.
Here's my last thing, just that I really like the idea of tackling that issue with like the cap on our solar electricity production, because like that seems to me a very attainable, goal, because it's like, what kind of mean person would be opposed to school districts making more solar energy, you know what I mean?
More efficient somewhere else.
No, but I just like, that just seems like you just are like the bad guy if you're gonna oppose that, like that seems very doable to me.
I've taken lots of notes. We'll have the notes there. Director Lee, and myself, we can get together, kind of come up with a plan for the 20th to have the next, iteration of this. I think there's some pieces in here where frankly, I just don't know enough about, the process of how we got to the guaranteed admissions. And I think there's learning we'll do along the way. And that's part of advocacy, is learning how do we get to where we are and how do we go to where we want to go? So we'll put together as much as we can. I do think it's important to have a general idea so that when you start, Director Lee and whoever Director Lee's counterpart is going to be, as you start engaging our representatives this summer, and I start reaching out and I start meeting with people that we know, what are our priority ones? What are our, these are ones that are on our radar and important, and kind of go from there.
Real quick, sort of adding on to that, since I think it's more unique, and I'm glad we're going down this path of having our own sort of individualized legislative priorities rather than, just selecting from the state agencies. It might be helpful to look at what the city has done. Just in terms of, I'm not saying like, that's the end all and be all, but it's a couple pages. I think maybe 7 or 8 issues, which just direct and at the level at which it's at, which is fairly high level. But I mean, just might be a decent starting point for a comparison. Yeah.
I was thinking 3. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be I would say under. The number the city has actually seems a little bit
But-
high, but we can
But
talk
it is
about
good to, it is good to coordinate
Yeah,
with
Yeah,
our counterpart.
well, it's gonna be also pass a lot of the.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, just for reference.
Yeah. We good?
I think we're
Look
good.
at that.
We don't need a motion, right?
Nope.
We're done. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you.
That was great.
Just so you all, there's a baccalaureate, senior baccalaureate tonight at 6 at the Holy Trinity. It's interfaith-based program where seniors will be musical performances, speaking, where they're individually talking about how religion has impacted them, non-denominational. So all are welcome. It will be about an hour, so nothing crazy, but nice and.
Sorry, what time is 6?
6.
It's after my bedtime.
It all depends on how things progress.
I think I took part of that from the fire.
Did you?
Yeah.